Chapter 1072. Good. The Fist Master stood up excitedly. He looked around at the others and his gaze paused on Cicada for a moment. He said in a deep voice, "Then prepare to attack. This time we must get rid of these undead and bring peace back to the Eastern Kingdom." The leaders of the various forces went to prepare. Before Cicada left, she glanced at the Eastern Princess. Legend had it that this princess had some kind of mysterious power. She could summon a powerful creature from the depths of the Eastern Mountains. The battle soon broke out. The next day, the monks attacked the members of the Dragon Witch cult in front of them. As the battle broke out, the Dracolic circling the mountaintop also moved quickly. One by one, the flying dragons soared into the sky. Hundreds of undead subspecies wyverns almost covered the sky, causing countless people to feel a trace of depression. They exuded a strong aura of death all over their bodies, and the ghostly green soul fire danced in their pupils. Ordinary people would be frightened just by a glance, and even professionals would find it difficult to deal with these enemies. The droll hated these undead, but they couldn't do anything to them. No transformation spell could deal with so many Dracolic, and most spells couldn't easily attack the flying dragons in the sky. However, at this moment, a strange melody suddenly came from the back of the camp. Accompanied by the sacrificial ceremony of many beautiful dancers, some kind of strange fluctuation quickly spread to the farthest place. This was a very ancient dance of the Magisprius. The Oriental dancer's predecessor was actually a witch, and the dance was first born to communicate with heaven and earth and offer sacrifices to the gods. Although history had changed a lot, and the existence of witches had almost disappeared in the Eastern Kingdom, some ancient Magisprius were still preserved, and the one the Eastern Princess had mastered was the most powerful one. A strange drumbeat sounded. A bonfire was burning in the center of the altar. Many graceful Oriental dancers were dancing in a special ritual dress. Their sleeves were fluttering in the wind, and the one leading the dance was the Empress of the East, whose face was covered by a veil. The battle was still going on. Because of the existence of the Dracolic, the monks, droll, warlocks, and rangers didn't have much of an advantage. It could even be said that they were suppressed by the enemy. However, along with the loud and clear cry of an eagle, a gust of howling wind suddenly came from the distant sky. A gigantic eagle appeared in their line of sight. It had a pair of golden wings that were graceful and full of power. When it spread its wings, it left a shadow on the ground. Even from afar, one could feel the aura of an overlord of the sky. Giant Eagle. It's the Eastern Giant Eagle. A flock of Eastern Giant Eagles with wingspans of more than 10 meters flew over from the horizon. They had sharp claws and beaks that looked as if they were made of metal. Part of their feathers were gold, while the other part was pale gold. These Eastern Giant Eagles carried a trace of special pressure. When they appeared, even the Dracolic became restless. They felt uneasy as if they were facing their natural enemy. In the Far East, legend had it that there was a creature that could fight against the dragons. It was the Eastern Giant Eagle that lived on the peak of the Eastern Mountains. It was a magnificent mountain that reached the sky and was called the Eagle Mountain. These great Eastern Eagles were even faster than the great dragons. Legend had it that they lived at the very edge of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the edge of the material plane. Beyond the Eagle Mountain was an endless sea of clouds. After the Eastern Giant Eagles appeared, many droll and monks who had not joined the battle bowed to the leading Golden Giant Eagle. The Eastern Giant Eagles held a very high position in the hearts of these people. Many of the monk school's trials went to the Eagle Mountain in the sea of clouds at the edge of the world. A droll school of the Eastern Kingdom's goal was to transform into an Eastern Giant Eagle. The loud cry of the eagles resounded through the sky. These Eastern Giant Eagles swooped down at the Dracolic in front of them like ferocious predators. Their speed was so fast that they were like lightning streaking across the sky. They attacked the enemy's vital points the moment they attacked, keenly attacking the weak points of the flying dragon subspecies. Suddenly, a series of roars came from the sky. The figure of the Dracolic fell from the sky, and countless golden blood-stained feathers fluttered down. The Eastern Giant Eagles suppressed the Dracolic in front of them. However, dragons were still the kings of the sky. The Eastern Giant Eagles paid a heavy price in the battle. In just the first round of battle, 5 or 6 Eastern Giant Eagles fell from the sky. However, these Eastern Giant Eagles did not retreat at all. They followed the ancient covenant, and there was never any thought of retreat in their eyes. They were brave and fearless. In ancient times, these Eastern Giant Eagles had once served the sun, so their feathers were blessed by the gods and turned golden. Although they no longer had a god to serve, every Eastern Giant Eagle had been constantly rushing higher into the sky from the moment they were born. When they got closer to the radiance of the sun, their wings would transform into a golden color. Eastern Giant Eagle, neutral good, challenge rating 16. The fierce battle was still going on. However, as soon as the Eastern Great Eagle appeared, a faintly discernible gaze was cast upon the battlefield. Soren watched everything. He did not expect the Eastern Giant Eagles to enter the battlefield before the last wave of demons. According to his memory, these ancient creatures were finally summoned by the god of light. The most common type of eagle in the material plane was the ferocious eagle, while the Eastern Giant Eagles belonged to another branch of the mythical eagle. The ferocious eagle's challenge rating was 3, while the mythical eagle's challenge rating was 6. The basic challenge rating of the Eastern Giant Eagles was 12. If they turned golden, their challenge rating would be 16, which was enough to compete with many young dragons. When these creatures reached a certain level of strength, they would directly go to the upper plane. At that time they would become the Eastern Giant Eagle, Heavenly Realm, challenge rating 18. The other branch would roam the astral plane. Their bodies would become quite terrifying, and their challenge rating would be 22 and above. However, they were extremely rare. They were created during the sun god's time, which was to say, they served Shanda in his previous life. The Dracolic fell one by one, and the number of Eastern Giant Eagles decreased. When the enemies in front of them broke through, some ancient and wise beings appeared on the battlefield. They looked like humans, but they were not completely human. These ancient beings were the tree shepherds, followers of the oak tree's father. Since the oak tree's father sacrificed himself, the tree shepherds left the Droll order. They stayed in the eastern desert, constantly healing the world's wounds. Golden seeds were planted one by one. The tree shepherds were not as slow and powerless as they looked. With the surging of the force of nature, towering trees rose from the ground. These were the trees that they planted in the depths of the desert. When the catastrophe came, these trees that had spirituality gathered all their vitality into a seed and let the tree shepherds take it away. Welcome the wrath of nature. With a low roar, the giant trees in front of him suddenly came to life. They turned into huge tree ants that rose from the ground and walked forward with the earth trembling. Traces of strange power were connected to Soren's heart. When these tree ants appeared, Soren's plant domain suddenly became restless. He tried to infuse his consciousness into one of the golden oak trees. Suddenly, Soren realized that he had succeeded. He entered the tree ant, and in an instant, the golden oak tree in front of him grew rapidly and turned into a giant tree ant that was more than 20 meters tall. Glory of the oak tree's father. The tree shepherds became restless for a moment, but it quickly calmed down. Soren tried to move his body. This was a temporary incarnation, and it seemed that the plant domain had taken control of the golden oak tree in front of him. This feeling was completely different from before. His movements were a lot slower, but each of his movements was full of strength. Soren even felt that he could easily defeat an adult dragon. The roots of the tree were connected to the ground. A steady stream of energy flowed into his body from the ground, healing his injuries and replenishing his mana. Soren tried to wave his hand in front of him, and countless vines rose from the ground. They were like flying ropes that entangled the enemies in front of him. Then he approached with heavy steps, and with just a light punch, a powerful enemy was smashed into meat paste. What a terrifying strength. The golden tree ant he turned into was even stronger than his demon form. Chapter 1073. The tree shepherds were a little excited. They seemed to think that the golden ent that Soren had infused was related to the father of the oak tree. Thus, many ent guards surrounded Soren and cooperated with him to break through the enemy's defense line. This was something that Soren had never experienced before. After transforming into a golden ent, Soren's defensive abilities were shocking. He was basically immune to normal physical attacks, and his resistance to magic was also shocking. Under the absolute suppression of his size and strength, any of Soren's normal attacks were comparable to that of an old dragon. Neither the Dracolic nor the demons were his match. A group of ent forced their way to the entrance of the temple like tanks. Behind them were countless corpses of Naruto's followers, but their battle was basically over. Because the ent's body was too large, the entrance of the temple could not be entered at all. Next, it was time for the monks to show off their skills. Many monks, rangers, and drool began to advance, and Cicada looked thoughtfully at the golden ent that Soren had transformed into. She felt a familiar aura, but she was not sure if it was. A fierce battle broke out. This was a battle that would determine whether or not the Desert of Death could be settled down. Many monasteries had sent out their higher-ups. There were dozens of legendary monks and druids in the area visible to the naked eye. Soren tried to break away from his ent's avatar. As Soren's figure left, the incomparably tall golden ent immediately shrunk to a height of 12 meters. The ent shepherds nearby seemed to be in deep thought, as if they had felt something. The father of the oak tree did not fall. He has only fallen into a deep sleep, but he is still watching us. An old ent shepherd said excitedly, as if Soren's avatar was the father of the oak tree's divine will. However, Soren knew that the father of the oak tree had truly fallen. Although he could not understand how it existed, the gods could not sense the father of the oak tree, so it should be dead, to a certain extent. Otherwise, the god of light would have done everything he could to revive Father Oak. As a former god of nature, Loshanda had always believed that the existence of Father Oak was an indispensable part of the world. With the power of Father Oak, it would be much easier to repair the damage to the material plane. The battle continued. There had been a large number of Naruto believers in the temple for a long time, and many devils had been summoned to the material plane. However, Soren had nothing to do with the upcoming battle. In fact, it wasn't just the Eastern Kingdoms that were searching for and destroying Naruto's shrine on the other side of the continent. Siric's aura? When Soren's divine sense left the golden oak tree, he sensed a familiar aura. At the back of the martial monks, a legendary rogue seemed a little out of place. He didn't look like a human from the Eastern Kingdom. Standing among the group of martial monks, he was a little eye-catching. At the same time, Soren felt the power of the three gods of death from him. Siric's chosen. Soren seemed to have found something, and his expression suddenly became a little surprised. Because of the clergy of murder, Siric's ability to sneak and hide was amazing. Soren had been looking for him for a long time and couldn't find him or his chosen. He didn't expect to find one here. It's all thanks to Sir Madeira this time. An old droll nodded slightly to express his gratitude to the rogue that Soren noticed. If Sir Madeira hadn't found this temple, I'm afraid this time's turmoil wouldn't have been so easy. Madeira was the rogue. He looked like an elegant middle-aged noble. After hearing the words, he waved his hand and said, "It's everyone's duty to fight against the evil Naruto. You don't have to thank me for this. Let's destroy these evil people in one go." Hearing his words, Soren suddenly thought of something. It seemed that this rogue had found Naruto's shrine, then told the martial monks and joined forces with them to launch an attack. What is Siric planning to do? Is he using the power of others to weaken Naruto's strength? Soren absolutely didn't believe that Siric's chosen would be a righteous ally, so the only explanation was to use external forces to attack the enemy. Many high-level monks joined the battle. However, the rogue named Madeira didn't join them. He quietly escaped into the shadows and then left to the other side of the battlefield. This was a chosen with the ability to permanently hide. No one noticed his departure. Sauron was the only one who noticed him and quietly followed behind him with his incarnation. The rogue left and went straight south. After about 10 kilometers, he came to the vicinity of a hidden underground cave. This god's chosen one vigilantly observed the surroundings and set up a trigger trap before cautiously entering. A little trap was not a problem for Soren. He quickly slipped into the shadows and followed. Then, after a series of twists and turns, he arrived at a hidden basement. It was a very simple altar. It didn't seem to have been built for much time, at most half a month. "My lord." The chosen knelt in front of the altar and prayed, "Madeira has completed his task. The fools of the monastery are attacking Naruto's shrine. It seems that we can completely destroy them today. A shadow appeared. A hazy body appeared in the distortion, and then a man with a pale face appeared. Very good. Siric's incarnation was full of joy and pride. He nodded and said, "Continue to prepare. Naruto is about to hold the promotion ceremony, and Clemvox is about to launch an attack. Our opportunity is right in front of us." Madara was also excited when he heard this. "Yes. My lord will retake death." Siric's figure faded. He didn't recover much power. Although he plotted against the pygmy gods, he also offended a new enemy. He had to find a way to sow discord to find an opportunity. The incarnation of divinity gradually dissipated. Such a simple altar couldn't sustain Siric's incarnation for long. Soon, his divine sense left the place and Madara began to destroy the altar. He couldn't let anyone know of Siric's existence because Clemvox also hated Siric. However, at this moment the space around them suddenly became still. A dark figure turned solid. Soren's incarnation suddenly appeared and directly grabbed Madara's neck. Then he used an extremely difficult mind control spell to control Madara. "I didn't expect to catch a big fish here." Soren's expression was full of joy. He activated his tracking domain and murmured, "I finally found you. You cunning fox." A trace of divine power spread out. Soren instantly captured the fluctuations of the altar and determined a coordinate in the far south. At the same time he used the soul interrogation spell on the chosen in front of him. He believed that he could interrogate a lot of useful information from the chosen's soul. Chapter 1074. This time he really caught a big fish. Siric sowed discord and used the power of the monasteries in the Eastern Kingdom to fight against Naruto's church. But he never thought that Soren had been paying attention to the Eastern Kingdom and caught him by the tail. In terms of divine power level, Soren was now a mid-level divine power close to a great divine power, and Siric had been sealed for too long. At present he was at most a low-level divine power close to a mid-level divine power. There was a whole divine power level difference between the two sides. With Soren's divine power of tracking, Siric was almost unnoticed by Soren. It was difficult for Soren to find Siric without seeing Siric with his own eyes. But now that he saw Siric's altar and avatar, it was much easier to track the target. Siric intended to make the water muddy and let Clemvox and Naruto both suffer, and Soren intended to kill him first. As long as Siric was killed, Soren would inevitably be promoted to a great divine power. At that time, there would be no problem in entering the battle between Naruto and Clemvox. Not to mention that the power of Mordor itself was very strong. As long as Soren made a move at the right time, the possibility of winning in the end was very high. After discovering Siric's trace, things became much simpler. For a time the entire south coast entered a special atmosphere. The forces of the outside world thought that Soren was going to attack Naruto in revenge for secretly instructing the demons to attack Mordor City. In fact, the gods all guessed that Naruto was the mastermind who controlled Naruto. At this time, Soren was definitely going to hit Naruto when he was down, and it was also something that they were very happy to see. This time, it could be said that Naruto made the public angry because even the Church of the Storm Lord destroyed a temple of Naruto. They thought that Naruto must be responsible for the plague that spread in the Amazon rainforest. This terrible plague reduced the population of the Amazon rainforest by half, and some tribes were basically destroyed. The environment of the primitive jungle was too easy to breed the plague. Coupled with the secret actions of Naruto's followers, the scope of the plague was very large. The gods only saw the movements on the surface. The elites of the Church of Mordor, including the Nightwalkers, the Arcane Assassins, the Central Administration, the Inquisitors, the Arcane Assassins, and so on, were all handed over to the High Priest and the Chosen. These people secretly went to the Raven Hills in the southern region. With the efficiency of the operation of Mordor, the whole transfer only took about a day. After Soren's body arrived at the south coast, Mordor had secretly gathered more than 1,600 middle-grade professionals, more than 300 high-grade rogues, and more than 100 other high-grade professionals. At the same time, the combat power of the legendary level had reached about one-third. The time to act was the next night. If the gods were to give Siric an evaluation, there was no doubt that it was very uniform. That was madman. Siric was a madman. His madness made him set up too many enemies, and he was even judged twice by the good and evil gods. It could be said that he was completely alone, although he was very powerful. A narrow-minded, self-centered, and extremely extreme god. Such a god was also different among the gods. No one was willing to cooperate with him. Even the Lady of Night was also hostile to Siric, thinking that his existence was a great threat. In the dark, some lurking shadows approached the Raven Hills. This was the base camp established by Sirik in a short time. Because there were too many enemies, Sirik's followers did not dare to move in the city. His temples were in the wilderness and most of them were built underground. In the dark corner of this land, there was a special emblem, a skull without a jaw with a black light background. This was Sirik's emblem. Only his followers could find and enter the underground temple. Sirik's kingdom was in the supreme throne, but now it was abandoned. He had been sealed for too long and his kingdom had withered too much. As a supreme evil god, even if he had been sealed for so long, Sirik still had many priesthoods. The core of them were lies, murder, conspiracy, fraud, and illusion. The domains he had were chaos, evil, destruction, illusion, and trickery. Do it. With a cold voice, the shadows in all directions quickly moved forward, and soon a fierce battle broke out. Sirik's followers lurked in the dark. They could access the murdered domain, and they also had amazing stealth abilities. The two sides engaged in a fierce battle in an instant. Not only did Sirik's followers die in large numbers, but Soren's followers also paid a big price. The enemy was very strong. Sirik's domain and priesthoods gave his followers more special abilities. At the same time, in the depths of the underground shrine, the attack from above had alarmed the Chosen. A black figure quickly arrived at the altar in the depths, speaking to a slender man with frightening black eyes and deathly white skin. "My lord." "Not good. We were attacked by the Shadow Church." The man who was absorbing power on the altar suddenly opened his eyes. Sirik frowned and sensed for a moment. Then his face changed greatly. "Shadow Master Soren?" A terrible shadow shrouded him. This was the perception brought by his priesthoods. He still felt that he had fallen into a terrible conspiracy. "Come here." Sirik's face changed a few times, then he said to the Chosen in front of him. The Chosen did not hesitate and quickly came in front of Sirik. At this moment, Sirik suddenly reached out and held the Chosen's head, and then an evil divine power with divinity poured into the Chosen's body. Ah! A shrill scream sounded in the depths of the basement, and soon the Chosen in front of him began to change. A lot of divine power poured into his body, and the Chosen in front of him gradually became Sirik's appearance. A lot of divine power poured into him made him look like a real god. Trickery, domain, deceit, priesthoods. Sirik glanced at the exact same version of himself in front of him, then slowly transformed into the form of a god's chosen one. "You stay here." Sirik looked outside and said to the avatar in front of him, "When the enemy comes in, self-destruct." After that, his figure disappeared into the darkness. Sirik quickly walked out of the temple. Along the way he did not show the power that a true god should have. Instead, he pretended to be a chosen and quickly rushed outside to break out of the encirclement. The cicada shedding its carapace. Facing Soren, he did not have much confidence in winning, so he chose to escape. Chapter 1075. It was true that Sirik was a madman. But he was also a very cunning madman. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't have been able to track down Sirik until now. Sirik, who was in the form of God's chosen, was very cautious. He restrained his power, and even when fighting against the chosen of Soren's church, he only maintained a slight advantage. He wasn't in a hurry to kill his opponent. Instead, he took advantage of the moment to open up the distance between them, and then instantly escaped into the darkness. There were a lot of enemies. Sirik was able to see over 1,000 invaders from the Shadow Church within his field of vision. Although he broke free from the seal and developed his church, Sirik's followers were obviously much weaker than Soren's. After all, Soren had other churches while Sirik was sealed for thousands of years. He had to start from scratch. He endured the pain in his heart and gritted his teeth as he gave up on these followers. Although he couldn't wait to kill Soren, Sirik knew that now wasn't the time. He had to be patient and accumulate strength. In the vast night, Sirik carefully escaped from the encirclement, and then quickly retreated to the north. He couldn't stay in the south any longer. Soren's church had too much influence in the south, and their intelligence network was too extensive. It would be easy for them to find him. However, just as Sirik rushed out of the encirclement, a slender man appeared in his sight. "It's an honor to meet you." Soren's figure emerged from the darkness. He smiled at Sirik's chosen and slightly bowed. "Dark Sun, Your Excellency Sirik." The tracking clergy locked onto the target. If it wasn't for Soren's tracking clergy, perhaps this time Sirik really would have escaped. A little bit of divine light appeared. A powerful pressure came from all directions, and some sort of quintessence energy sealed off the space around them. Sirik's expression immediately became unsightly. That's really a big deal. Sirik's ashen face reverted back to its original appearance. His expression was a little desperate as he said, "So many people actually came. I think I should really feel honored." In the southwest, Vivian and Lillian appeared. In the northeast, the incarnation of the goddess of wealth slowly walked out. In the south, the figure of the goddess of agriculture sat on a chair made of emerald green vines, deep in thought as she stared at Sirik in the distance. In the north, Princess Royal's figure floated in mid-air, her expression seemingly unmoved. In the direction of the sea, the incarnation of the goddess of ocean was holding a trident and watching from afar. It seemed that she had no intention of fighting. Soren smiled but said nothing. 6 mid-level divine powers and above surrounded Sirik. The powerful spatial seal made it impossible for him to escape. As for the possibility of survival, it was very slim. After all, you are the legendary Dark Sunday. Soren didn't care about the sarcastic tone of the other party's voice at all. He calmly said, "I think it's not too much to be careful when dealing with the former Prince of Lies, right?" He was Sirik. He was once the first person among the gods. At his peak, he was more powerful than the Lord of Light and Father of the Oak Tree. He was the legendary child of destiny. He rose quickly in the first Avatar crisis and seized the power of the 3 death gods. He also stole the priesthood of Shadow. When Sirik was at his peak, not a single god could stand up to him alone. Even in the end, when he faced judgment, the gods had to join forces to deal with him. No one dared to despise him. Even if Sirik was a madman, he was the most terrible madman in the multiverse. If it weren't for Sirik's own death, there would be no Clemvox, the king of the dead. He would become the real Lord of Death, the absolute king of the lower planes. Even Asmodeus might not be his opponent. At his peak, Sirik was closer to the greater divine power than the current Lord of Light. To some extent, he had become the same existence as Jurgil. Unfortunately, he still courted death in the end. If it weren't for Sirik's desire to become the god of gods, and his madness led to his own destruction, Sirik would definitely be the most favored god of fate. His experience was even more exaggerated than Soren's. Although Soren had quickly reached the level of a mid-level divine power, Sirik had once directly advanced to a great divine power in the Avatar crisis. After advancing to a great divine power, he immediately began to dabble in greater divine powers, wanting to become the god of gods. Although he had been sealed for so long, Soren still didn't dare to despise him. After all, he was the real child of destiny. If he gave Sirik a chance, who knew what would happen in the end? If he really seized the power of Naruto and Clemvox, then the direction of history would definitely be problematic. Even if he was trapped in a desperate situation surrounded by gods, Sirik still didn't give up hope. He was looking for opportunities and flaws. But to his great disappointment, although the other gods didn't intend to attack immediately, no one was careless enough to let him escape. This was Sirik. The goddess of agriculture had heard of his name before she was born. He was one of the #1 figures that the gods feared and hated. If Sirik had any weakness, it was that he was too conceited. Basically, Sirik didn't have any allies and his relationship with the other gods was very tense. When he first created the Sirik scripture, he wanted to enslave the other gods. If he didn't fall into madness after reading it, many gods would have been plotted against by him in the end. No one dared to relax their vigilance. Even the goddess of wealth and the goddess of ocean, who didn't intend to attack, were cautious and wary of any possible movements of Sirik. A silver-white streamer appeared. A strange silver-white curved sword appeared in the palm of Soren. This was an artifact that hadn't been completely completed, but it had reached the power of grade 5. After Soren advanced to the great divine power, it would be completed completely. At that time, it would become a powerful artifact above grade 6. Your Excellency Dark Sunday, Soren's figure was surrounded by shadows, and in an instant, he turned into the form of a true god. He slowly said, "Let's settle our grievances. The past of the 3 gods of death should be completely ended here." The power of the ancient god of death, Jurgil, was divided into 3 and became the 3 gods of death. 3 great divine powers, evil existences. During the first Avatar crisis, the 3 gods of death fell at the same time. Sirik gained most of the power, but because of his own actions, Clemvox took away the priesthood of Mirko. Later, the god of tyranny, Ban, was resurrected. Clemvox entered the underworld and ruled over death. Sirik became the god of murder. A new structure of the 3 gods of death appeared again. Before the Arcane Empire, Sirik plotted against the god of tyranny to steal his divine power. But he didn't expect that his actions had already angered the gods. He was judged a second time and sealed, and the priesthood of the god of tyranny was taken away by the dread lord. Clemvox became the big winner at that time and completely controlled the underworld of death. Now, Soren's identity as the son of slaughter was the continuation of the three gods of death. Cyric still had the power of the god of murder, and Clemvox still represented the ruler of death. This was an inescapable battle of fate. Soren, Clemvox, and Cyric were destined to only have one winner, and this winner would become the true lord of death. It seemed that Cyric didn't have the chance to do so. 6 mid-level gods began to approach gradually. They completely surrounded the Prince of Lies from 3 sides: the sea, the land, and the air. This time Soren did not hold back. He mobilized almost all his allies. Chapter 1076. The earth was shaking. Terrible explosions continued to sound, and the people nearby, whether they were believers of the Shadow Church or the Murder Church, none of them dared to come close. Because this was the battlefield of the gods, any mortal, even legendary professions, could die in an instant if they approached. The powerful power of divinity sealed the space, and more than one breath that made mortals tremble appeared. The fierce battle caused countless cracks to appear on the ground, and the surrounding vines and plants grew wildly. The cold ice and snow fell from time to time, and occasionally, a dazzling golden light flashed like a golden lightning that tore the sky. "I'm not willing." The low roar was like a beast and blood dripped down his arm. Cyric's expression was full of madness, like a beast trapped in a trap. His whole body was covered with a layer of white frost, and there was already ice around his body. Except for the divine blood that was not frozen, the surrounding vegetation had completely withered. There were fatal wounds on Cyric's back and shoulders. Even with the superior magic, it still could not be healed in a short time. His divine shield had already been breached by the joint forces of the gods. In his somewhat chaotic memories, this scene seemed a little familiar. Soon he recalled that painful time. That was the second time he was judged by the gods. He was expelled and sealed by the gods. The scene at that time was so similar to what he was experiencing now. It's time to end it. Soren's face was as calm as ever, but his palm was slightly trembling. Cyric cut off half of his left palm, and even with the divine power, it would take some time to recover. The enemy was much more difficult to deal with than expected. Although Cyric was now weak to a lesser divine power, Soren had a feeling of fighting against a greater divine power. The power of murder. The power of trickery. The power of illusion. If it were not for the Princess Royal's ability to freeze illusions, the battle would be much more difficult than it was now. But everything was about to end. Cyric's divine force had already been exhausted. Without a divine shield, there was no way he could withstand the attacks of so many intermediate gods. A silver-white stream of light streaked across the sky. Soren became one with the silver blade, instantly unleashing the power of his divine domain of shadow. Cyric waved his razorback in a futile attempt to block Soren's attack, but his depleted divine power was no longer enough to support him. As the silver light cut through his body, Cyric finally fell to the ground with a pale face. Cyric had not broken free from the seal for long enough. Although the church was established, the time was too short. Under the background of the Avatar crisis, Cyric could not accumulate enough divine power to maintain the defense. In the face of the joint attack of the gods, he was even more powerless. The golden blood of divinity sprinkled down. Countless dazzling lights surged out from Cyric's body. Most of them surged into Soren's body, while some of them landed on the others. A row of data appeared before his eyes. God of murder, Cyric has been killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 75,800,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 210 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 65 divinity. Seize target's divine domain of murder. Your domain of slaughter has been enhanced. Your divinity of slaughter has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Seize target's divine domain of lie. You've gained domain of lie. Seize target's divine domain of deception. You've gained domain of deception. Seize target's divine domain of illusion. You've gained domain of illusion. Seize target's divine domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of conspiracy. Seize target's domain of craftiness. Your domain of craftiness has been enhanced. God of murder, Cyric has been killed. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Compatibility 95%. You've gained domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of deception. You've gained domain of slaughter. You've successfully seized target's divine domain of murder. An unprecedented amount of divinity surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before. The indescribable compatibility allowed Soren to absorb the power that dissipated after Sirik's death. This power was so similar to his that the degree of fusion was quite astonishing. 210 divinity points. 65 divinity points. This was almost the majority of the power that Sirik had accumulated since he broke free from the seal, and now all of this divinity had surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before when killing any god. No god could let Soren absorb such a large amount of divinity like Sirik. This was because their origins were also the three gods of death, and the degree of fusion of divinity far exceeded that of other gods. Seize target's divine domain successfully. You've gained domain of murder. You've gained a new domain, destruction. You've successfully advanced to great divine power. A part of the divinity was scattered. Although Soren and Sirik's divine domain and divinity had an amazing compatibility, there was still a considerable amount of rejection. That was, Soren belonged to the lawful evil faction, while Sirik belonged to the chaotic evil faction. There was no way to merge with this divinity. Sirik's divinity with the power of chaos was scattered to the others. Some of it was absorbed by the gods who came to help, and some flew to the mortals' bodies. At this moment, a surge of divinity gushed out from Soren's body. The gods present couldn't help but be surprised when they saw it, and then smiled and nodded to express their congratulations. He had advanced to a great divine power. After seizing Sirik's divinity, Soren directly advanced to a great divine power, and his divinity value had reached a very shocking level. At present, Soren's divinity value was 715 points, and his shard of divinity was 350 points. Basically, he was almost the same as the old great divine powers, and his divinity value might even be a little higher. Now, most of the power of the three gods of death had been seized by Soren, and the only part left was Klemvox's. As the former king of the dead, Klemvox's divinity was obviously stronger than Sirik's. If he succeeded in killing him, then Soren might be stronger than the ancient god of death, Jurgil at his peak. After all, there was still Naruto from another world that he needed to deal with. Chapter 1077. As the power of divinity was taken away, Sirik's body gradually turned into golden light spots and dissipated. The bodies of the gods were all in the form of pure energy, so there would be corpses left behind after killing powerful gods. Soren had destroyed Sirik's soul, and with the complete death of Sirik on many dark underground altars in the material plane, the statues representing Sirik instantly lost their brilliance, and then cracks appeared one after another, and finally the whole statue completely collapsed. If a god fell, these statues would automatically be destroyed, and at that time, the believers would know that the god they believed in was finished. My lord. The figure of the high priest appeared on the edge of the battlefield. She whispered to Soren, "The church has lost a lot of believers and the giant has also died." Sirik's assassin was very difficult to deal with. The new legendary warrior of Mordor, the giant, was attacked from behind by the enemy when he was fighting against a divine assassin. Although the giant did not die on the spot, the result was extremely tragic. The giant died of exhaustion after fighting against 3 enemies. The gods could quickly create a group of legendary professions. Although these people lost their higher potential in the end, the improvement in combat power in a short period of time was obvious. Soren merged with the powerful power in his body. He felt the new priesthood and then said, "I know. Bring his body back to Mordor. Inform the temple to prepare for the resurrection ceremony." Finally he had a great divine power. Soren lifted the state of God's descent, bowed slightly to express his gratitude to the other gods who helped him, and then directly returned to Mordor. All the gods present were important allies. No matter what they needed, they had to wait until Soren obtained the position of the Lord of Death. The Shadow Church paid a huge price this time. There were 7 archbishops who died, and there were about a dozen other legendary professions. The great divine power was a benchmark. In the context of the Avatar crisis, the great divine power also represented one thing, that was, Soren could finally use the resurrection spell. During the period of the Avatar crisis, it was relatively easy for the gods to resurrect a person. Although it consumed a lot of power, it was still within the acceptable range. Even the weak gods could do it. But it was completely different during the Avatar crisis. If you wanted to resurrect a person, only the existence of a great divine power could try. Princess Royal directly returned to Arendelle. The goddess of wealth left a message for Soren and left as well. The goddess of ocean did not join the battle. She just nodded and merged into the waves. The goddess of agriculture came to Soren's side to take a look, shook her head and sighed, "Sirik has finally fallen. Perhaps this is a good thing for the gods." The battle ended. Sirik's destruction was no surprise, and after Soren's alliance with so many gods, it was impossible for anything else to go wrong. One competitor had been eliminated. However, Soren also had a lot of things to do. Naruto was about to make his move, but Soren had one more important thing to do: expand his own temple. Soren had reached the level of a great divine power, so it was urgent to build a giant god temple in Motor City. A complete giant god temple consisted of many parts. First, there was a magnificent main temple, and then there were 2 or 3 subordinate temples. A complete giant god temple was equivalent to the headquarters of a divine system. The believers of the entire divine system could pray here. At the same time, the giant god temple was also a direct link to the divine kingdom. The giant god temple was the limit of what could be built in the material plane. The next day, many legendary professions, including the giants, were sent to the temple in Motor City. The grand prayer ceremony was presided over by the high priest, and Soren came to the center of the temple in the form of a god. A huge amount of faith power was gathered. Even with the interference of the Avatar crisis, Soren still condensed a majestic divine power after advancing to the level of a great divine power. The resurrection ceremony consisted of 2 parts. If the body was intact, then it could be solved with only a greater resurrection spell. During the Avatar crisis, ordinary resurrection spells were ineffective. Only after the end of the Avatar crisis could ordinary resurrection spells resurrect targets who died within 12 hours, and the bodies must be intact. However, Soren had the divine title of Death, after all, so it was easy for the resurrection spell to recall the part of the soul. Almost none of the bodies in front of him were intact. In the fierce struggle between the 2 divine churches, almost all the believers who died in the battle had incomplete bodies. In this case, only Soren could resurrect them. Greater limb regeneration. With the emergence of the golden light, Soren transformed into the form of a god. First, he cast a legendary greater limb regeneration spell. This was the most advanced regeneration spell. Even the head could be repaired and grown back, but if there was no soul, many times the caster would become a vegetable. The incomplete body of the giant kept regenerating. It looked like a troll who had a part of its head cut off. It quickly recovered to the most basic human structure, but the lost hair didn't recover. To cast greater limb regeneration, one must have enough knowledge of the human body. In fact, this was a legendary necromancy spell. The dead in front of him kept regenerating, and their bodies became complete again. However, they did not resurrect, they were still dead. Greater resurrection. The dazzling golden light suddenly rose. When Soren completed this super difficult divine spell, countless low chants sounded. Then the golden light rose in the center of the temple. With the convergence of the power of death, transparent souls passed through the space crack in the center of the temple and were directly summoned by Soren from the river Styx. All resurrection spells were related to the god of death. It was difficult to succeed without the consent of the god of death. Even in the period outside of the Avatar crisis, the resurrection spells of the gods were actually dealing with the god of death. The souls from the river Styx were injected into the body. A burst of vitality was awakened, and the believers who had died in front of him gradually opened their eyes. Their expressions were a little dazed, and it seemed that their consciousness was not very clear. This was the drawback of the resurrection spell. Any soul would come into contact with the river Styx after death. The earlier the resurrection, the less contact with the river Styx. But even so, they would lose part of their memory. The number of times a person could be resurrected was limited. The power of the river Styx could not be underestimated. If a person was resurrected too many times, even the gods could not separate them from the river Styx. However, these people in front of him were obviously not one of them. Soren successfully cast the resurrection spell and resurrected all the legendary professions who died in this battle. However, the price of doing so was that his divine power was greatly consumed, and the golden light over the temple became very dim for a while. Resurrection. It was never a cheap spell. Chapter 1078. In the Land of Bones. Countless undead wandered in this wilderness. This was originally an ancient battlefield of the Arcane Empire. Later, due to the fall of the floating city, it formed a strong energy radiation. The resurrected undead here were more dangerous than in other places because their bodies were shrouded in a negative energy field. Any effective attack could drain the enemy's attribute value. This was a forbidden zone for the living. There were no living beings in sight. Occasionally there would be some necromancers shuttling back and forth. They were busy transporting strange materials from the lower planes, produced in the region between the spirit realm and the underworld. A huge altar stood in the middle of the land. This altar covered a large area. It looked like a white bone fortress. Around the altar were 7 strange towers. They looked a bit like obelisks, but the top of the obelisks were burning with blue flames. No creature dared to approach the obelisks. Even the liches kept a distance. This was because this was a soul-summoning tower, which was also a soul-locking tower. Countless wraiths wandered around the top of the obelisks, but they could not break free. Countless wraiths were released from the blue flames. They kept rushing outside and roaring, but in the end they hit an invisible energy field. Some of them disappeared and were absorbed by the soul-summoning tower. The other part was bounced back into the tower. "My lord." A high-grade necromancer priest came to the altar and said respectfully, "The other soul-summoning towers have been completed. We can begin the ceremony." Along with the appearance of a dark figure, a horrible existence descended on the top of the altar. Naruto, a god from another world, took nearly 1,000 years to take root here and steal the power of the death god system. The god of death, Hell, was a famous and notorious deity. His face was dry and horrible. He was like a skeleton with rusty red skin, thick dark green hair, and a black cloak. His eyes, teeth, and nails were soaked in drugs. His black staff, Reaper, could form a blade of light in the shape of a giant sickle on the tip of the staff. It could instantly kill any mortal when it touched it. This artifact was like the Orcus staff but stronger. Naruto was the real god of death. He could kill any mortal at will. God of death, the enemy of kindness, the abomination of life, the messenger of darkness, the king of gloom, and the reaper of flesh. In the long history, the god of death, Nero, had too many titles. He was a god of the neutral evil camp. At his peak he was a great divine power. Although he had weakened to a mid-level divine power after coming to this world, he could not be measured by the standard of an ordinary mid-level divine power. This god of death also wanted to be as powerful as the ancient god of death, Jurgil. Hell's priesthood was death, darkness, murder, and the underworld. Was death, evil, and craftiness. Basically, any god who had the craftiness domain could not be underestimated. Just look at those gods who had the craftiness domain. The Queen of Spiders, Lolth, the god of murder, Sirik, the goddess of magic, Mistra, and the Lady of the Night, Shar. Basically, gods who had the craftiness domain were very dangerous. Naruto's body came. With his appearance, countless undead spirits fell silent. Then rows of undead spirits knelt down as if they were worshipping their master. A strong aura of death emerged. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, countless people had died in the material plane. The disaster of the undead had intensified this process, causing countless mortals to die in the disaster. I am the Reaper of Life. I am the Master of Death. Naruto stepped into the center of the altar with a huge black scythe in his hand. With his footsteps, countless undead emerged from the ground and then flew wildly to the surrounding obelisks. The huge power of death surged. Almost at the moment when Naruto started the ritual, countless undead in the material plane sensed it. The remaining power of the long sleep domain also dissipated. Many hazy wandering souls quickly appeared, and mortals could see them with the naked eye. This situation only appeared when one was close to the underworld. Now, at the same time as Naruto's promotion, the entire material plane was disturbed. In a short time, the power of the law was eroded by death, making the material plane become like the spiritual world. Only in the spiritual world could there be so many wandering souls. In an instant, all the gods sensed it, and the ones who sensed it the most were the gods related to death. Oh! An angry roar came from a distant direction, followed by a golden light across the sky. The power of the long sleep domain suddenly skyrocketed, and the figures of many ghosts became hazy again. Naruto, life-hater. Clemvox's golden figure appeared in the sky, and he angrily said to Naruto, "You can't succeed. I am the king of the undead." Altars rose in the material plane. Naruto was not surprised by Clemvox's appearance. He had been preparing for this for a long time. "Weak Clemvox. You don't deserve to be in charge of death." Naruto's lips curled into a sarcastic smile, and then with a wave of his hand, more than 10 powerful undead auras appeared in the surroundings. The undead, oh. the Emperor of the Undead, Shane the Ninth, the Demigod Lich, Sarzastan, the Skeleton King, Wadaland. Powerful undead appeared in the surroundings. There were 5 or 6 famous undead in the multiverse. Even if the others were not famous, they were still high-grade legendary undead. These were all Clemvox's enemies. For a long time, Clemvox's suppression of the undead made many undead kings hate his existence. At this moment, there was a slight change in the sky. Then a huge spatial door was opened, and the emblem representing the Githyanki appeared in front of them. Another ally of Naruto had arrived. The evil ancient Lich Empress, the ruler of the Githyanki, Lich Empress Velakis, appeared in the field of vision. This terrible brain-eating lich did not completely come to the material plane. She was full of suspicion and could not imagine anyone. Even if she had an alliance with Naruto, she still held back. Thousands of eternal sleepers appeared at the edge of the land of bones. They belonged to the Church of Clemvox. Countless believers who lost their loved ones in the disaster of the undead gathered together. They were full of anger and hatred. With the power given by Clemvox, they attacked the countless undead in front of them. This was a battle between the living and the dead. Hatred made their faith firmer, and hatred also made them fearless in the face of countless undead. The muffled prayers continued. Naruto stood on the altar and absorbed the power of the obelisk. He did not seem to care much about the existence of Clemvox. There were other undead kings guarding the periphery of the altar, and this promotion ceremony was not afraid of other people's interference because Naruto's strength was close to the great divine power. Now all he had to do was to integrate the death power of the material plane. If he succeeded, he would change the characteristics of the material plane and make this plane more suitable for his rule. Chapter 1079. Clemvox's figure was stopped. Although he was a god with great divine power, under the background of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox had lost the power of a true god. All the gods were suppressed. Even Clemvox could only fight in the form of a saint. That was to say, he was now only a saint with a profession level of more than 40. If not, he would not have been seriously injured by Naruto's sneak attack for a while. Many undead kings surrounded Clemvox's figure. In the face of so many powerful liches and undead kings, even Clemvox was not easy to get away, not to mention that there was a Githyanki Lich Queen in the sky. Clemvox was obviously at a disadvantage. And it seemed to be a very serious disadvantage because he couldn't even force Naruto to make a move. However, after all, Clemvox was the old king of the dead. When Clemvox's figure was stopped by many undead kings, a low voice suddenly came from the southwest. Enough. You undead have caused countless disasters in the material plane. Now it's time for you to go back. In the distant sky, a male human with wounds and scars all over his body appeared. When he walked with great difficulty, it could be seen that his feet were lame, and his hands were seriously injured. His thin and short body was only wrapped in a loincloth. Although his head was slightly bald, he was bald, but there was always a comforting, gentle smile on his unattractive face. His body with thick body hair was crisscrossed with various scars, bleeding wounds, burning scars, and marks left by various kinds of torture. But even so, a powerful force shrouded the edge of the battlefield. Some kind of domain was comforting the living while suppressing the brutality of the undead. Ilmet, god of suffering. This mid-level divine power and god of the lawful good alignment seemed to be persuaded by Clemvox. He joined the battle and stood on the side of the living. The gods were all spying on them. No one dared to easily get involved in the battle of the king of the dead. Perhaps only the gods of the lawful good camp could be easily persuaded by Clemvox to deal with Naruto. After all, Naruto's behavior had seriously angered these lawful good gods. Ilmet was a mid-tier god. He was the weeping god and the broken god. His church comforted and took in the disabled, the oppressed, the poor, slaves, serfs, and so on. It had a wide range of beliefs among the lower class of the material plane. Ilmater was a kind-hearted, docile, quiet, and peaceful god. He was willing to bear the suffering of the whole world. However, although the weeping god's personality was very gentle, he would also show an extremely violent and cruel side when he was angry. He was extremely concerned about all the children and young lives in the world, and he struck down those who dared to harm those he protected. The undead calamity killed many people. Among them, the weak children were even more difficult to survive. Ilmet's anger made his pupils shine with golden light, and it looked like a sharp sword directly aimed at Naruto. This deity wasn't very powerful. She was not a fighting god, but the Church of Ilmater had many loyal followers all over the continent. In this cruel and realistic world, Many victims, the sick and the poor, relied on the Church of Ilmet to survive. People in many areas respected the Church of the Weeping God, and his priests often received a lot of generous help when they practiced medicine everywhere for free. Groups of monks appeared on the edge of the battlefield. They were the legendary Broken, the monk group of Ilmet, and one of the most powerful monk groups in the material plane. These powerful monks were good at enduring pain and turning pain and suffering into strength. They could be part-time priests, and they could also advance to secret believers, holy warriors, divine power believers, divine power seekers, and saints without being punished by leaving their profession. At the same time, because of the power of Ilmet, these monks also had the ability to heal. They could use the gift of healing as well as a small number of healing divine spells. This suffering god paid attention to spirituality, and his church had a group of monks who gave up their physical bodies in pursuit. The destroyer was like a sharp knife that pierced into the hearts of countless undead. At the same time, the undead lords under the control of Ilmet, Kalemver, and the undead lords under Naro's control became nervous. However, Naruto himself stood on the altar without the slightest movement. He just continued to absorb the death power of this world and said to the void, "It's time to fulfill your promise. When I take over the death god system, you can get more rewards." Oh, well. For a moment, the other gods were surprised because they did not feel the existence of other people. Hee hee. A sudden laughter echoed on the earth, and then a blood-red light tore the sky. In the sky above countless undead, a door to the Bator Inferno opened. "Devil?" Clemvox's frightened and angry voice sounded, roaring, "As the god of death, you actually colluded with the devil. This is an unforgivable betrayal of the gods." The god of death guarded the underworld and the river Styx. Whether it was devils or demons, they all wanted to steal souls from the river Styx. For a long time, the god of death had been secretly competing with the soul stealers, and almost all the soul stealers were backed by the big shots of the lower planes. Abyss fiends walked out of the portal one by one. Leading them was the devil duke of the first level of the Bator Inferno, Bayer. Behind him, a devil duke with a snake-like body appeared. He was the devil duke of the third level, Mammon. Naruto had indeed colluded with the devil. In order to seize Clemvox's power, he had even betrayed the underworld. This was a betrayal of the gods' alliance, because the god of death's most important duty was to protect these souls and prevent them from being stolen by the demons and devils of the lower planes. Countless devil elites appeared in the sky. These were the elite troops from the Abyss Blood War. Bayer was the commander of the Blood War, and the troops he could mobilize far surpassed the other devil dukes. The situation of the battle was instantly reversed. With the appearance of the devil army, neither Clemvox's church nor Ilmater's church had any chance of victory. It was impossible for a mortal army to fight against the Blood War. Weak and shameful Clemvox. The god of death is the master of death. He is not the servant of the other gods. Naruto had a mocking smile on his face. "Look at how pitiful you are. As the ruler of the underworld, you have fallen to such a state." Countless devils attacked from the sky. In an instant, Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses. To be able to persuade the Blood War to join the battle, there was no doubt that Naruto had paid a sufficient price. The only possibility was the river Styx. He had betrayed the river Styx, allowing the devil's tentacles to infiltrate the river Styx. Chapter 1080. Is Naruto crazy? In the distant city of Motor, Soren, who was secretly watching all of this, was also shocked. Naruto actually used the river Styx as a bargaining chip to persuade the demon's main forces in the Abyss Blood War. Asmodeus must be behind this. This is simply a betrayal of the gods' covenant. A trace of anger appeared on Soren's face and he murmured, "Is he really not afraid of completely angering Jurgel?" This was a very ancient covenant. It had existed since the time of the ancient god of death, Jurgel. When the first batch of creatures appeared in the world, their souls were transported to the underworld by the river Styx after they died. Unless it was a particularly important believer, most of the gods, whether good or evil, would eventually receive their souls from the underworld to the kingdom of God. The task of the oracles from the other world was to be responsible for the exchange of souls with the servants of death, and the servants of death's task was to protect the river Styx and souls to prevent them from being taken by the soul stealers from the lower plane. This was a battle that had lasted for countless years. The demons coveted souls, resulting in the birth of many soul stealers every year. They constantly tried to take souls from the mainstream and tributaries of the river Styx, and at the same time guarded against the powerful servants of death. Bator Inferno and the Abyss both had lords who coveted the wealth of the river Styx. The gods of death were the first line of defense against them. Every god of death had to deal with the soul stealers, and the souls themselves were the wealth of the gods of death. Even the three gods of death during the crazy period did not dare to betray this ancient covenant. But now it seemed that Naruto had obviously abandoned part of the benefits of the river Styx, and let the demon's tentacles penetrate into the river Styx. This was a very terrible thing. If the demons had an endless supply of souls, then they would continue to evolve and give birth to a large number of powerful senior demons. At the same time, a large number of souls would be desecrated, resulting in the Bator Inferno having an extremely terrifying number of soldiers. We can't wait anymore. Soren suddenly stood up and said, "Activate the arcane tower. Activate the Mies nucleus. Prepare the super magical pulse cannon. Activate the diamond golem army. Prepare to launch a super long-range energy attack on the devil army." The demons had always been the kind of people who would not act unless they saw a rabbit. They would not act unless they got the benefits. Naruto had obviously fallen a part of the Styx into the hands of the demons. It was impossible for Clemvox's church to defeat the Devil Legion. These were the main forces of the Abyss Bloody War. How could mortals fight against the powerful legendary demons? On the battlefield, a terrible massacre was taking place. Although the undead were extremely powerful, they were still inferior to the terrifying Blood War Legion. Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless mortal believers fell under the butcher knives of the devil elites. Even the powerful broken monks could only resist the devil's attack. Among the enemies, there were many greater devils, among which there were thousands of abyss fiends. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of Nero's mouth. He loved the flowers that bloomed at the end of life, and he thought they were the most beautiful things. Batches of mortals were being slaughtered. Clemvox's power was constantly weakening, while his power was constantly increasing. Everything seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Clemvox had no chance to turn the tables. But, just when Naruto thought he had won, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in the distant sky. It was like a sun rising. Countless devils had a look of horror on their faces. Then, as if they had seen an extremely terrible existence, they fled frantically toward the blood-red portal one after another. The light shrouded the earth. The golden sun was suspended in mid-air, and a terrifying divine power shrouded the earth. Countless undead melted like snow under this light. Even the vengeful spirits at the top of the obelisk quieted down, all of them hiding in the blue soul fire. "Life-hater, Naruto." A deep voice sounded from the golden sun in front of him. The dazzling figure of the god of light appeared. Behind him was not the sun, but the Seven Hills Paradise, that shone brightly. Finally he could not stand it anymore. The figure of the god of light shone brightly like the sun god in ancient times, illuminating all the land in front of him, leaving no place for the darkness to hide. Holding the scepter in his hand, he waved it toward Naruto's figure. Powerful divine power fell from the sky, and countless low prayers and chants sounded. Behind the god of light, countless angels on the Seven Hills Paradise began to chant together. The dazzling holy light shrouded everything as if to purify all evil. "Naruto, you should pay for all your evil deeds." Countless voices echoed. Angels of holy light, mastiff-head angels, trumpeter angels, golden-winged lions, seraphs, on the layers of Hills Paradise, countless angels of the Yasone god clan chanted together. With a blow from the god of light, the whole world was shrouded in the power of holy light. Countless undead and demons were set ablaze and directly turned into ashes in the light. A trace of horror finally appeared on Naruto's face. He waved the black scythe of the god of death toward the sky with all his might, but the next moment, his entire figure was sent flying backward. The altar under his feet instantly cracked and quickly collapsed in the fire. Kaboom! The obelisks around his majesty fell one after another. The god of light's full blow destroyed the entire ceremony on the spot. What terrifying power! Soren could not help but swallow and murmured, "No wonder he is the existence closest to a greater divine power." Under the sky, Naruto's body had become broken. His withered face was burned by the holy light, and his whole body was emitting black fog. Countless souls rushed out of his cloak. The moment these souls came into contact with the holy light, some of them screamed and turned into ashes, while others quickly sublimated and turned into hazy white figures. They cheered and jumped, and the darkness on their bodies faded away. Then these souls emitted a faint light and rose into the sky. One by one, they swarmed into the mountain paradise behind the god of light. The devil's figure had dissipated. In the sky, the god of light frowned and looked at the gradually disappearing blood-red crack. It was as if he felt another gaze from across the plain watching him. This powerful existence was not afraid at all. He faced the gaze until it dissipated. Then he turned to look at Clemvox and disappeared into the sky. He did not kill Naruto, because this battle would determine the ownership of the god of death, and the power of death was completely opposite to his. The god of light left. With just one blow, he severely injured Naruto and took away the countless souls that Naruto had collected for a long time. The evil in these souls were purified, and the good ones were taken into the Seven Hills Paradise. Chapter 1081. Innumerable souls flew out. These were the mortals who had died since the outbreak of the undead disaster. It was hard to say how many there were, but there were definitely tens of millions of them. Such a huge number could no longer be counted. The god of light took away most of the good souls, and the evil souls were judged. However, there was a limit. Even gods would not easily destroy souls. In addition to these souls, there were more of the gray souls of ordinary people. These people had no obvious good and evil. They had done good and bad things in their lives, and this kind of people was often the most common in the mortal world. These gray souls gathered together, and the number was shocking. They turned gray under the light of the god of light, and then one by one escaped into the ground. There was also the Styx River in the material plane. But mortals could not see it, because the Styx River was in the deepest part of the material plane. It was a huge whirlpool that directly sucked in souls and brought them to other planes. Under normal circumstances, when ordinary people died and were buried in the ground, their souls would be swept into the Styx River, and then through the spiritual world to the underworld. These souls that were imprisoned by Naruto were free, and the price was that Naruto's strength rapidly decreased. Soon, his aura became similar to Clemvox but more or less stronger. As early as the god of light appeared, the Lich Queen of the Githyanki had run away. This ancient and evil existence was so careful. It was said that in order to prevent her position from being shaken, she would suck the brains of many Githyanki who were above level 11. This Lich Queen had existed for a long time. It could even be traced back to the history of the spirit-sucking empire. For a monster to be able to live for so long, her ability to take advantage of the situation was quite amazing. When she saw that the god of light was involved in this battle, she immediately abandoned Naruto and fled back to the astral world. The astral world was boundless and even the gods could not find her. Motor City. When the god of light appeared, Soren's expression suddenly relaxed, and he immediately said, "Temporarily stop the long-range attack of the Arcane Tower. Gloria. You take over the authority of the Arcane Tower, and I will go to the Land of Bones personally." Gloria's figure appeared. There was a hint of worry on her face, but when she saw Soren's determined expression, she could only bite her lips and nod. After all, this was a battle between greater divine powers. It was impossible to say that they weren't worried about Soren, because no one had absolute confidence. Come back alive. Fallen Witch's figure also appeared on top of the tower. She stared at Soren with an expressionless face, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged him fiercely. Regarding this, Gloria did not seem to change at all. It seemed that she vaguely knew something. "I'll wait for your return." Gloria stood on the astrology platform and gently stroked her belly as if she was trying to convey something to Soren. Soren nodded and smiled. "Don't worry. I never do anything that I'm not completely sure about." Two rays of light appeared. "Brother? Brother." Vivian's and Lillian's figures appeared, and the two little faces had determined expressions. "We'll go with you." Soren did not hesitate at this moment and nodded. "Okay." The two little girls' voices were unquestionable, and Soren knew what to do at this time. Outside the Arcane Tower, little sparkling snowflakes appeared, and Princess Royal's figure quietly appeared. She glanced at the several women in front of her and frowned slightly. Then she said, "Let's go. The opportunity will be gone in the blink of an eye." A hazy figure appeared. "Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you." The goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair slightly and glanced at Soren, then said, "What happens next will depend on you. The next battle." Other than Princess Royal who could fight alongside Soren, the other goddesses could only cheer for Soren at most. Whether it was the goddess of agriculture or the goddess of wealth, it was impossible for them to help him fight against Naruto and Clemvox. The goddess of ocean was also completely impossible. She was unwilling to fight against Cyric the last time. Thinking of this, Soren could not help but turn his gaze to Princess Royal. Although the Princess Royal was often cold and indifferent, he did not expect that in this fateful battle, she was the only one who was willing to fight side by side with Soren. The goddesses in this world would flock to him when there were benefits, but when it came to life and death, there were not many who could be relied on. Their relationship with Soren could only be one of mutual benefit. If he really thought that he could subdue these goddesses by sleeping with them, he would have died a long time ago. There were many goddesses who had a good relationship with Soren, but looking at the goddesses who were here today, he knew that these goddesses were unreliable. Goddess of magic, goddess of wealth, fiery lady, goddess of joy. None of the goddesses who had some relationship with him in the past could be seen today. However, just as Soren was about to teleport away, an absolutely unexpected person appeared. It was a very sudden appearance. It was a gorgeous woman wearing a dark green dress and a veil on her face. No one knew when she appeared outside the arcane tower, but there was a faint smile on her lips. When Soren looked at her, she suddenly smiled playfully and said, "Surprised by my arrival?" The others present were shocked, and at the same time, they looked as if they were facing a great enemy. I really didn't expect it. Soren felt that this face was very familiar. It only took a moment for him to remember the other party's identity. He smiled bitterly and said, "I'm really surprised. Lady Calamity. The goddess of misfortune, Ben Saba. A goddess that Soren would never have expected to appear here. I'm just here to give you my blessings." The female incarnation of the goddess of misfortune slowly walked in front of Soren, then kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "Your enemies will be shrouded in misfortune." A goddess that no one would have expected. Now she was betting on Soren, and it seemed like she was betting a lot. Note, curse of misfortune. What? Soren was puzzled. Lady Calamity smiled and glanced at Princess Royal with a disdainful expression. Then she said, "After all, we are all in the abyss, aren't we? Someone outside of fate. The new child of fate." The beautiful figure chuckled. Then she slowly disappeared. This evil goddess had a bad reputation. It was said that she was narrow-minded and vengeful. She was extremely jealous of her sister, the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune was loved by everyone, but she was very afraid of her. Lady Calamity had a special divine power. She had the power of fate, opportunity, and craftiness. She could bless others to avoid misfortune, and she could also curse some people to bring misfortune to them. This was also useful for gods, although the effect was far less than when it was used on mortals. Lady Calamity's figure disappeared. Soren didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. If the goddess of fortune didn't choose to help Naruto and Clemvox because of her, then this was definitely a big advantage for him. Chapter 1082. The Twin of Destiny was unpredictable. They were outside of the circle of the gods. Apart from things related to fate, they were only interested in the struggle between each other. Whether it was the Lady of Misfortune or the Goddess of Fortune. Since the disaster of Dawn, they had drifted away from the gods and were unwilling to get close to any gods. However, no one could ignore their existence. Soren was now very confused, but he did not hesitate. Since the Lady of Misfortune said that his enemies would be shrouded in misfortune, then this matter must be true. The power of the Twin of Destiny was almost the same. With her support, even if Soren's enemies were not shrouded in misfortune, Soren himself would not be unlucky. The greatest ability of this goddess was to keep people away from misfortune and always keep their luck above average. In the Land of Bones, the final battle had already broken out. Countless skeletons piled up into a mountain. As Naruto's scepter fell, thousands of skeleton warriors climbed up in the blink of an eye. The altar had been destroyed, but there were still countless skeletons on the battlefield, especially the corpses of the senior demons. Naruto had even summoned some powerful undead creatures. Although Naruto was suppressed by the God of Light and was at a disadvantage after all, his overall strength was still there. The disaster of the undead was planned by him, and after the underworld was seized by him, he gained the power of the death god system. Clemvox's time as a god was not as long as Naruto's. When he was a mortal, he was only a warrior. His combat power was not at the top among the great divine powers. A fierce battle broke out. Clemvox waved the touch of destiny, and rushed to Naruto in front of him. This was a divine heavy sword, and Clemvox was wearing a set of strange silver-white chain mail. Kiki. In the face of Clemvox's attack, Naruto did not have any fear and directly waved his light blade. Naruto was a real combat god of death. His main profession was Necromancer level 15, Priest level 20, Rogue level 15, which was a standard profession that could cast spells and fight in close combat. Naruto's attribute template was all attribute mastery. All of his attributes were above 25 points. His agility, wisdom, and intelligence were all above 35 points. To put it simply, this was a god that basically had no weaknesses. Unless it was suppressed by someone like the god of light who was close to a great existence, it would be able to win against any other god. The god of light had severely injured him. But for some reason the god of light did not decide to kill Naruto. Instead he chose to release these souls and leave. This was also a chance for Naruto. It could even be said to be his last chance. Because as long as he killed Clemvox, he could still be promoted to a great divine power, and no other gods could compete with him for the position of the god of death. In this way, even if he met the god of light again in the future, Naruto would have no fear. The god of light's biggest mistake was not to kill him together with Clemvox. At least that was what Naruto thought. And now this mistake would give him a great opportunity. The god of suffering was not a combat god, and Clemvox's strength was not as good as his. As long as he could find a way to kill Clemvox and stabilize the position of the god of death, then no god could shake Naruto's position. As for the matters after the Avatar crisis, when the gods returned to the gods' kingdom, everyone could sit down and talk about it slowly. The power of death could not be inherited easily. Looking at the ability of the whole material plane, there were only a few who could inherit the power of death, and in Naruto's view only he and Clemvox could do it. The ancient god of death, Jurgil, was basically not in charge anymore. Although Naruto had made a big mistake, Clemvox had also failed in his duty. The gods were not willing to get involved in this battle. The god of light did not kill Naruto on the one hand to preserve his strength and on the other hand to let them fight it out. Long sleep, field. Compared with Clemvox, who was a warrior god, Naruto was much stronger in his spellcasting ability. In desperation he could only open the long sleep field. Otherwise, Naruto could resurrect the dead indefinitely because he had more divine power and countless divine spells. Divine aura. Naruto held the black staff and knocked it heavily on the ground. In an instant, an invisible divine power spread to a range of 17 kilometers. This was a more powerful ability than aura. Naruto directly opened the divine aura that integrated many fields, and this ability was often only mastered by gods who had been sealed for a long time. Under the effect of this divine aura, Clemvox's long sleep field was directly ineffective, and the spells cast by his chosen to dispel the dead, dominate the dead, and so on were all ineffective. The confrontation between the two gods of death directly offset most of the additional death abilities. God's Descent. Regional Divine Shockwave. Naruto in front of him used the rogue spellcasting ability, and Clemvox could not help but be angry. He directly entered the state of God's Descent, and a regional divine shockwave opened a passage directly in front of Naruto. Clemvox firmly believed that as a warrior, he could suppress Naruto as long as he was close. Naruto made a disdainful smile, and suddenly stretched out his pale finger bones. Countless black silk threads flew out and rushed to the chosen behind Clemvox. Regional Touch of Death. Clemvox was immune to all instant death spells, but his believers could not do this. When Naruto completed the spell in an instant, a large number of Clemvox's believers fell down immediately. Many of them turned into skeletons in an instant, and their souls were controlled by Naruto's evil power. In contrast, Naruto's advantage was too great. Because he was the life-hater, most of Naruto's believers were undead, and the rest were not undead or half-undead. Naruto could use the big skills of death without any scruples, but Clemvox absolutely could not. Dang! A dull loud sound echoed in the middle of the battlefield. Clemvox finally rushed in front of Naruto and forced Naruto back a few steps with just one blow. But Naruto did not care. He waved his light energy blade while completing another evil spell. Life Drain. A strange black line flew out from Naruto's cloak, and then these black lines connected to everyone regardless of friend or foe. Whether it was Naruto's believers or Clemvox's believers, everyone in the vicinity was connected, and the vitality of all these people began to be absorbed by Naruto. Clemvox's strength was really strong. Just a frontal attack injured Naruto, but the injury recovered in a flash and the others nearby were pale. Whether it was the undead or the living. Naruto's terrible specialization in necromancy allowed him to absorb vitality regardless of friend or foe. This evil ability made him almost invincible. Legendary Dispel Magic. Clemvox was angry but he did not lose his mind. He immediately used the legendary Dispel Magic, but it failed directly. Naruto's casting level was about 35, and the casting level of necromancy spells was above 40. Some necromancy spells were blessed by the domain, and the casting level could reach about 45. That was to say, even Soren could not dispel it, let alone Klemvox, who was a warrior god before becoming a god. Naruto was not afraid. The terrifying black light would automatically lock onto the target nearby, and when the target died, it would automatically switch positions. Not only were there Kalemver's believers nearby, but there were also a large number of undead and necromancers who had been resurrected in hell. He did not even activate his divine shield, and he was completely focused on facing Kalemver's ferocious attacks head-on. Chapter 1083. Naruto must have cheated. Outside the battlefield, Soren watched all this and said with a stunned expression, "Fortunately, Klemvox took the lead first. What a strange ability. There was no way to suppress this ability at all. Unless all the people near Naruto were killed, all the people below the level of gods would have their life sucked. Every time Klemvox attacked Naruto, a person nearby would fall. It might be the undead who served Naruto, or it might be Klemvox's believers. After a short confrontation, the morale of Klemvox's believers plummeted. Even the god of suffering restrained his believers from approaching. Although he was kind, he was not stupid. In this situation, the believers would die if they approached. Hatred made Klemvox have no intention of stopping at all. The Avatar crisis had greatly reduced the power of the gods. It was impossible for Kalemver to kill Nero in one fell swoop. Under such circumstances, his believers had suffered great casualties. These believers had basically died at the hands of Kalemver. Hee. As expected, Naruto started a psychological attack and mocked, "Weak Klemvox. I didn't expect you to have such a fierce side. I'm really impressed. Look around. These believers who served you all died under your attack. The one who died just now was your god's chosen one, right?" More than a dozen of Klemvox's believers had fallen, among which there was no lack of legendary masters. Oh. Klemvox roared like a trapped beast and roared, "These people all died because of you. You should pay the price for all this." Finally, he could not bear the death of his believers and said in a deep voice, "All of you step back." The morale of Klemvox's believers was low. Hearing this, they hesitated a little and began to retreat. In this case, they had no choice. The strange black silk stayed in a range. Although Klemvox's believers retreated, the undead controlled by Naruto gathered. These silk threads that absorbed life fell on them. How naive. A large number of undead surrounded them. Naruto had a contemptuous expression and mocked, "Do you think you can defeat me by yourself?" Countless undead gathered. Every attack of Klemvox could cause a lot of damage to Naruto, and several undead nearby would fall. However, more undead were still gathering. There were at least tens of thousands of undead troops, and Naruto's believers behind them. Klemvox did not know how long it would take to kill these tens of thousands of undead. The god of suffering could not provide any help to the god of suffering now because many undead lords had stopped the broken monks. Naruto had not opened his divine shield so far. From the current situation, he had the absolute advantage. "Do you want to fight?" Princess Royal's voice sounded. Soren shook his head and said, "No hurry. I'm waiting for someone to appear." The battle continued. Klemvox's power seemed to be endless. He ordered his church to attack the undead, and he kept attacking Naruto. His divine power was rapidly consumed. Although the undead nearby were not strong, there were still more or less high-grade undead that could attack him once, and each attack weakened his divine shield. This scene was so familiar. Last time, Klemvox was also besieged by countless undead liches, and these were forced to escape with serious injuries. Soren was waiting patiently. Because he knew that there was still one existence who had not appeared, and she was very likely to be Klemvox's backup. Area Dispel Magic. Arcane Domain. When Klemvox's suppression became more and more obvious, suddenly a dazzling light of arcane magic emerged, followed by a powerful magic emerged and Naruto's life drain was dispelled. A beautiful figure appeared on the battlefield. Verges, the goddess of death and magic. Another god from another world. After she failed to win over Soren, she seemed to have reached some kind of agreement with Klemvox. At this moment, she quickly dispelled Naruto's spell, and at the same time, cast a large-scale attack spell. Arcane Torrent. Energy Storm. Countless undead nearby fell, but then they were resurrected in Naruto's domain. In the face of the sudden appearance of the enemy, Naruto was very alert. He did not hesitate to open his divine shield, and at the same time, connected the touch of death to the nearby ancient mummies. These undead were difficult to be killed by large-scale spells, and at the same time, their vitality could also be absorbed. Smite of Destruction. Clemvox finally seized this opportunity. Powerful divine power gathered on the heavy sword, and a black light appeared, and he slashed wildly toward Naruto. Outside the battlefield, Soren finally made his move and said in a deep voice, "Activate the arcane tower." Plane waymark 115,245. High Priest, help me to lock the attack range with divine power. Indiscriminate attack within 3 kilometers. Even the Queen of Spiders could not resist the arcane crystal pulse cannon. The damage it caused to the divine shield was very terrifying. Just after all the targets appeared, Soren gave the order to attack, and the arcane tower in the city of Motor had already risen to a height of tens of thousands of meters. Gloria was responsible for driving the Mies nucleus, and the Fallen which was responsible for activating the elemental furnace. The energy of the entire arcane tower was activated to the limit, and then a dazzling light energy impact directly cut through the space. Boom. The battlefield in front of them was hit by a devastating bombardment in an instant. This was a crazy bombardment that did not distinguish between friend and foe. Whether it was Clemvox's church or Naruto's believers, they all suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless skeletons were directly vaporized, and even legendary figures were killed instantly. Do it. When a round of ultra-long-range energy attacks was over, Soren's figure immediately entered the battlefield. The nearby space had been completely blocked. Neither Clemvox nor Naruto wanted the other party to escape. The terrible ultra-long-range energy attacks directly destroyed a part of the battlefield, and both Naruto and Clemvox were very embarrassed at the moment. Clemvox had consumed too much power at the beginning, and at this time his divine shield was about to dissipate. Cold ice and snow were flying. Within a range visible to the naked eye, the bodies of countless undead were quickly covered with a layer of white frost, and their movement speed and reaction speed were rapidly reduced. In the distance, in the arcane tower in the city of Motor, Gloria also gave an order at the moment when Soren attacked. She said in a serious voice, "Open the space waymark. Teleport the golem army. Activate the magic construct number 1. Activate the magic construct experimental body. Teleport the diamond golem into the battlefield. Thaling, prepare to open a large portal." Chapter 1084. It was impossible for Soren to wait for a winner to emerge from such a battle. Because whether it was Clemvox's death or Naruto's death, the power of death would be absorbed by the winner. At that time, a new greater divine power would be born. Once again, it proved how unreliable the goddesses of this world were. When the figures of Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal suddenly appeared on the battlefield, the goddess of death and magic Verges was aware of the presence of so many mid-level gods and above, and there was also a greater divine power, Soren. After suffering a super long-range energy attack from the arcane tower, she did not hesitate to use her special magic priesthood to teleport to the edge of the battlefield. Then, without even saying a word to Clemvox, she escaped on the spot. She escaped. She left in an unusually swift and decisive manner without any hesitation. She was a god from another world who came to this material plane for the sake of benefits. If there were benefits to be gained, she would naturally take action. But if she was in danger, then she would leave without hesitation. It was impossible for her to stay and fight to the death. For this little benefit, it was not worth for a mid-level god like her to risk her life. The Avatar crisis was about to end. As long as they lived to return to their divine kingdom, the gods still had countless years to enjoy and squander. If not for this, the first-generation goddess of wealth and the previous-generation goddess of magic would have tried their best to sneak back to their divine kingdom during the last Avatar crisis. Just like those goddesses who were close to Soren suddenly fell silent at this time, the goddess of death and magic also became a bitch in the face of life and death. She did not hesitate to betray the agreement with Clemvox. It seems that the only reliable ones are those around me. No wonder the god of light has such powerful divine power and there are so few members in the divine system. Most of them are personally cultivated gods because these old gods are not reliable at all. Soren watched as the goddess of death and magic fled, but he had no intention of stopping her. He could have stopped them, but Soren's targets were Clemvox and Naruto. The goddess of death and magic's escape meant that Soren had one less opponent, and also made him understand the nature of most of the goddesses in this world. He couldn't help but glance at Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal, who all wore solemn expressions. In such a battle of life and death, there was still someone who stood by his side and gave him their back. Obviously, he was much luckier than most of the other gods. The second round of ultra-long-range tactical attacks were scattered around the periphery. The home field had basically been cleared, but in order to prevent Naruto from resurrecting too many undead, Gloria controlled the arcane tower to carry out a second round of tactical attacks, clearing out most of the undead nearby. At the same time, Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal all attacked Clemvox in an instant. The reason why they did not choose Naruto was because he was an undead. It was more difficult to kill him than Clemvox, and his overall strength was currently a little stronger. Ice Prison. Princess Royal pressed her hand on the ground, and the ice spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the area within hundreds of meters became a cage made entirely of ice. Sword of Annihilation. Although Lillian and Vivian could not defeat the enemy alone, the two of them together were close to the level of a great divine power. The Dread Lord was originally a great divine power, and his divinity and divinity were about 3 times that of an intermediate divine power. After this power was distributed to the Son of Fear, it gathered again. About 1/3 of it was absorbed by Soren, and the other 2/3 were divided between Vivian and Lillian. If a part of the divine power was excluded, then Vivian and Lillian together were equivalent to more than 1.5 intermediate divine powers. They were already qualified to participate in this battle. Avatar. Soren was still the main force in the battle. At the moment of the attack, he activated Avatar, and then his figure split into 2 and turned into a stream of light, slashing toward Clemvox in front of him. Rogue versus Warrior. Soren was not afraid of facing Clemvox head-on at all. Damn it. Clemvox was also covered in blood at the moment. He had consumed a lot of divine power earlier, and now he had to withstand a wave of superconducting pulse energy cannon. His divine shield was basically broken. He felt like he was very unlucky today. He encountered all kinds of bad luck, and the goddess of death and magic ran away without saying a word. He consumed a lot of divine power in the battle with Naruto, and this wave of energy attack also caused his church to suffer heavy losses. In this case, he and Soren were at an absolute disadvantage. Clemvox even had the idea of escaping, but the Princess Royal used her divine power to create an ice prison and directly trapped him inside. Divine Power Impact. With Naruto outside, Soren gave up most of his tactics and directly chose the simplest way. That was to completely suppress the enemy with divine power. Waves of divine power hit Clemvox. This was the most violent way for a god to fight. It was a battle of the divine power gap between the two sides. Divine Power Impact was divine damage which ignored most resistance. The power consumed by one divine power impact was about enough to cast 1 or 2 legendary divine spells, which directly caused about 120 to 240 points of divine damage. This kind of damage was basically unavoidable. Mortals were likely to die in the face of it, and gods could only rely on their divine shield to resist. Convert Slaughter EXP. Soren's divine power seemed to be endless. After the first wave of impact, he began to convert the accumulated Slaughter EXP. Then his figure shuttled through the shadows and approached Clemvox's body. His opponent's injury was very serious. The opportunity was in an instant. If Clemvox was given a little time, he could cast Greater Restoration. Then his injury would be completely healed, and even if he had no divine power, he could still hold on for a while. Frozen Kingdom. Princess Royal also keenly grasped this opportunity. She raised her hands and activated the power of ice and snow. In an instant, everything was frozen in a range visible to the naked eye. Die. Soren's figure attacked from the left and right. Even Clemvox couldn't be sure which one was real and which one was fake. He futilely used the last of his divine power to hold up a shield, but the next moment, it was broken. Then a silver-white stream of light flashed across his body, and Clemvox's figure was directly split into 2. Boom. It was as if the whole world was shaking. With the death of Clemvox, who had exhausted his power, the realm of eternal rest that shrouded the material plane suddenly collapsed, and the characteristics of the material plane also changed in an instant. The surging golden light spread out. As the former king of the dead, Clemvox had a very large amount of divine power. Most of this power poured into Soren's body, and a small part flew to Vivian and Lillian. Even the Princess Royal next to him and Naruto outside the frozen prison received a little bit of divine brilliance. However, most of the power was still absorbed by Soren. Chapter 1085. No. Seeing the exhausted Clemvox fall under Soren's hands, Naruto suddenly let out a roar full of unwillingness. He had planned everything to force Clemvox to this point, but he did not expect Soren to take the fruits of his labor. After Clemvox died, most of the divine power of death gathered on Soren's body, and then countless souls appeared as if they were worshipping the new king of the dead. A row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. King of the dead, Clemvox killed. Extracting target soul power. You've received 18540,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 270 divinity points. Divinity leveled up. You've broken through to greater divinity. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 210 divinity points. A huge amount of divine power emerged. Because Clemvox was the king of the dead, the divine power that escaped after his death was very spread. Although Soren received most of it, a lot of it was scattered to others, among which Vivian and Lillian received the most. It was as if he had broken through some kind of limit. In an instant, Soren's figure floated in the air, and then the material plane trembled slightly, and the eternal slumber that had been broken was restored. At the same time there was a burst of low chanting. A dark kingdom appeared behind Soren, and a majestic shrine was built in it. In the sky, there were shadow angels and otherworldly servants flying around the shrine. 3 huge reincarnation pools were paved with marble, and in the distance there were rolling mountains. As if they had sensed something, countless heroic spirits and angels flew and prayed, and under the command of the otherworldly messenger, they let out joyful voices. Greater divinity. Naruto seemed to have thought of something and his face became abnormally pale. The Shadow Kingdom appeared behind Soren. As if he had broken through some kind of critical point, Soren suddenly transcended the influence of the Avatar crisis on the gods, and his connection with the Kingdom of God seemed to be much closer than before. At least he could easily see the situation inside even if he could not enter the interior of the Kingdom of God. The divine power was unprecedentedly strong, and the impact of the Avatar crisis was resisted by Soren's divine power. While allowing Soren to connect with the Kingdom of God, he also felt a vast power of chaos emerged from the depths of the Sea of Chaos. This was the source of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, and the source of chaos emerged from here. Seize target's divine power. Your subgrade. Seize U SSS of S U S's. Seize S's S's. You've obtained the fate domain. Seize is you've obtained the ordered domain. Seize the target, eternal slumber, domain. You've obtained the eternal slumber domain. Eternal slumber was reactivated. King of the dead, Clemvox killed. Your divine domain of death has been upgraded. Your death domain has been strengthened. Compatibility, 98%. You possess the divinity of death. You have the slaughtered domain. You have successfully obtained the King of the Dead divinity. An unprecedented amount of divine power surged into Soren's body. Just like when he killed Sirik last time, Soren had an indescribable level of compatibility that allowed him to absorb Clemvox's energy in a frenzy. This energy was so similar to his that the degree of compatibility was quite astonishing. 270 divinity points, 210 godhood points. As a god who had been in charge of the death pantheon for thousands of years, Clemvox had an astonishingly strong amount of divine power. This was something that had never happened before when he killed any god. No god could let Soren absorb so much divine power like Clemvox. And this was under the condition that a lot of divine power was distributed to others. Soren still obtained an astonishing amount of 210 divine power. If it was a complete set of divine power, it should be more than 300 points. A new, eternal slumber, domain was activated. Clemvox only had 2 divine domains which were dead and death. Most of the divine domains of death were gathered on him, so he was the king of the dead. In addition, Clemvox also had the domains of order, protection, fate, travel, and eternal slumber. However, it seemed that the travel domain did not have a high compatibility with Soren. Most of the other domains were integrated by Soren, but the power of the travel domain dissipated and was obtained by others. This was inevitable. No god was completely the same as others. Even gods with the same divine domain would have many differences in details. Great divinity. After killing Clemvox, Soren's power was unprecedentedly strong. Although he had not fully integrated yet, he had completely suppressed Naruto. Clear out all the undead nearby. Soren still maintained the Avatar status. Killing Clemvox gave him more than 18 million slaughter EXP. Even if he had consumed a lot of it, it was enough to maintain the Avatar status for a long time. A portal opened. Diamond golems appeared at the edge of the battlefield. At the same time, two huge magic constructs also appeared on the battlefield. Pursue the victory. It was better to pursue the enemy with courage than to follow the example of a tyrant. It was impossible for Sauron to let Nero go. This was the best chance. If Nero escaped, the multiverse was so big. What if Nero took back the original world? Soren, Princess Royal, Vivian and Lillian. Even the god of suffering, Ilmater, who was watching from the side, had faintly surrounded Naruto. Because just now, Soren sent a message to Ilmater, Naruto must pay for his evil deeds. Since the outbreak of the undead calamity, countless mortals have died because of his ambition. The eternal slumber will continue to exist. After I take over the divine domain of death, the undead calamity will end immediately. The river Styx will once again operate according to the ancient covenant. All of this should end. Whether it's us or the world, we have paid a huge price for this. We can't let Naruto escape. The god of suffering was an absolutely good god. And such a righteous god was undoubtedly convinced by Soren. Clemvox had completely fallen. All of this had to end because too many people had died. It had to be said. Sometimes the good gods were really easy to make use of. Because when justice needed them, you only needed a little reason to persuade them to act. The premise was that they did not act against you. Chapter 1086. The Shadow God's kingdom appeared behind Soren. Because his speed of improvement was too fast, and his foundation was not as strong as the God of Lights, the scene behind Soren was only limited to the central temple, unlike the God of Light's seven-floored mountain paradise. But this also meant that his power was far beyond the other great gods. Soren had killed too many gods along the way, and most of them were related to death. This made Soren's accumulation of power in this area very large. Basically, the power of the three gods of death, except for Vivian and Lillian, had all gathered on Soren. At the same time, there were also powers from other gods. Naruto finally panicked a little. The situation had completely collapsed, and his luck seemed to have been used up all at once. After Soren snatched Clemvox's head, the god of suffering was also easily convinced. 1 against 4. There was almost no chance of winning. But just as Soren was about to make his move, a small accident happened. With the appearance of the light of divinity, the gods who were watching suddenly seemed to be ready to fight. Naruto. A beautiful woman with long black hair appeared at the edge of the battlefield and looked at Soren thoughtfully. Then she said, "You should pay for everything you've done." Lady of the Night, Shar. With the light of divinity, another god also appeared at the edge of the battlefield. The veiled Lady of Misfortune suddenly appeared and smiled at Soren. Then she said, "The ancient covenant of the gods cannot be betrayed. You should be judged by the gods." Golden lights appeared one after another. Just as Soren had the absolute advantage, the gods who were watching in the dark all appeared in their avatars, as if they could not wait to beat him up. What's going on? Brother. Why did they all suddenly appear? These gods were all in their avatars. They were afraid that Soren would misunderstand, and they were also afraid of Soren's power. Therefore none of them came in their true forms. Soren quietly put some distance between them and said telepathically, "They're all here to pick peaches. Be careful. This group of bitches." How could Soren not guess Madame's intentions when she suddenly appeared that night? Naruto was different from Clemvox. His priesthoods were death, darkness, murder, and the underground world. Didn't he look familiar? That was right. Some of these priesthoods were compatible with the Lady of Night, and after she appeared, some vague figures appeared immediately. These were some gods of the evil camp spying on them. Are we just going to let them steal the fruits of our victory? Lillian seemed a little angry. Soren shook his head to appease her, then frowned and said, "It's not the time to fall out with them. Let's get rid of Naruto first and see who can get more priesthoods." Naruto's power was a little more mixed. He controlled the domains of darkness, murder, death, the underground world, and so on. At the same time, he also had the power of evil and arcane, which was very attractive to many gods. To put it bluntly, they came to see the situation and wanted to get some benefits back. Do it. Seeing that the situation was getting worse, Soren immediately took the lead. As soon as he took action, the other gods also immediately took action, especially the Lady of Night, Shar. The avatar she sent seemed to be very powerful, and even had power that was not weaker than Vivian and Lillian. The light of arcane magic appeared. Just as the Lady of Night took action, the avatars of the Goddess of Magic and the Lady of Silver Moon suddenly appeared. Originally they did not have any thoughts, but if the Lady of Night appeared, it would be completely different. But the moment the Goddess of Magic took action, a strange figure suddenly appeared behind her. Be careful. The Lady of Silver Moon let out a cry of alarm, but it was a little too late. The other party had a very strong arcane power. The Queen of Spiders, Lolth? It was a god with a very beautiful appearance. If it were not for the lower half of her body being a big spider, she would have been a stunning beauty. This was not the Queen of Spiders' original body, but it was also an existence similar to Soren's demon avatar. The Queen of Spiders had a core avatar, which was the spider elf form seen in front of them. She was the battle avatar of the Queen of Spiders and had about 70% of the strength of the original body. Most of the people present were the avatars of gods. The Goddess of Magic was in great danger when she was attacked. What was worse was that the Lady of Night suddenly showed a smirk on her face. She suddenly gave up on Naruto and rushed to the avatar of the Lady of Silver Moon. What are these bitches trying to do? Soren was a little confused for a moment, but this did not prevent him from taking Naruto's head. The Goddess of Misfortune seemed to really want Naruto to die. She assisted Soren to attack Naruto from the side. Facing the siege of the gods, Naruto had no chance at all. He was only able to withstand 3 rounds of attacks before he was seriously injured by Soren. But what Soren did not expect was that at the moment when Naruto was seriously injured and dying, a woman about 10 feet tall suddenly appeared behind Naruto. She was dressed in a loose black robe and wore a black feather mask on her face. Dense black feathers flowed from her face into the depths of her hood. Then she waved a strange circular blade and stabbed Naruto from behind. This weapon seemed to contain some kind of terrible power. In an instant, it destroyed Naruto's body. Then countless rays of divine light exploded. Some of the power that represented death rushed to Soren, while a considerable amount of divine power was integrated into her body. Nightsinger. Damn it. Soren's face changed slightly, and he instantly put some distance between them. The Lady of the Night had 2 different forms. One was a Nightsinger, and the other was a Dark Dancer. The one who appeared just now was the Dark Dancer, and the one who attacked was the Nightsinger. She was the most terrible assassin and rogue in the multiverse. Her strength was much more dangerous than Soren's. Just as she attacked Naruto, an evil black power began to devour Naruto's divinity. It took away the power that represented darkness, murder, crafty approach, and subterranean world. This ancient goddess had a lot of divine titles, including but not limited to the Underdark, Night, Hatred, Loss, Oblivion, Sleep, Nightmares, Illusions, Lies, Deception, Unrevealed Secrets, Hidden Places, Betrayal, Sinister, Temptation, Rogues, Theft, Murder, and Winter. A strange dark light appeared. At the moment when Naruto fell, a hazy kingdom appeared behind the Lady of the Night. Great divinity. Soren thought about his own situation and immediately thought that the Lady of the Night might have broken through to the great divinity. This goddess had a secret divine title, so even if she had entered the great divinity, her divine kingdom, Shadow Realm, was still hazy. As if satisfied with the result of this battle, the Lady of the Night could not help but let out a chuckle. She then looked at Soren playfully and quickly disappeared. She must have been plotting for a long time. The Lady of the Night could grasp the timing so well. Soren was absolutely sure that the Lady of the Night had been plotting against Naruto for a long time. Even in her calculations, Soren could be used by her because it was difficult for her to absorb Clemvox's power, but there were too many things she could take from Naruto. Not far away, the avatars of the Goddess of Magic and the Lady of the Silver Moon were in danger. After seeing that the Lady of the Night had advanced to the great divinity and the appearance of the Nightsinger, the Goddess of Magic immediately cast a pleading look to Soren. However, Soren had fused with too much divine power of death and did not have the intention to fight with the Lady of the Night and the Queen of Spiders at the moment. In this case, the Goddess of Magic could only grit her teeth and quickly disperse her avatar with the Lady of the Silver Moon. No matter what, it was better to waste divine power than to have her avatar killed by the Lady of the Night. The current situation was not good for them. Let's go. The power of death in Naruto's body was fused with by Soren. Because too much power had just been obtained, Soren felt that his divine power was a little out of control. He looked at the Lady of the Night in the distance and said decisively, "The situation is settled. Let's get out of here first." At the moment of Naruto's death, although Soren did not get the last head, he also gained a lot of divine power. The Lady of the Night took some of it. However, Soren also gained about 130 points of divinity and 100 points of divine spark. Now that this power was a little beyond what he could bear, Soren had to find a way to fuse with the power of death. Sirik, Klemvox, and Naruto. The three powers of death were a little different, and Soren had to fuse with them to create his own profound meaning of death. Chapter 1087. Soren left decisively without any hesitation. This undoubtedly disappointed many of the gods who were secretly spying on them because this newly ascended god was simply too showy. They were happy to see Soren and Lady of Night have a fierce conflict. Whether there was a chance to gain benefits from it or not, they were happy to see both sides fight. But now they were undoubtedly disappointed because even if Lady of Night stole part of Naruto's priesthood and divine power, Soren did not want to fight with Lady of Night. Instead, he took his allies and left to avoid more accidents. Fight with Lady of Night? Fight with this ancient god who had existed since the birth of the material plane? Soren was not crazy. He was not a madman like Sirik. Even if he could temporarily suppress or even defeat Lady of Night, what was the point? What was present now was just her avatar. If he couldn't kill Lady of Night in one blow, he didn't know how much revenge the city of Mordor would suffer in the future. Looking at the priesthood of the Mistress of the Night, it was either assassination, conspiracy, or secret. Offending such a powerful and terrible enemy was an extremely passive thing for a new god like Soren who did not have a strong foundation. If Soren had been a god for hundreds of years, he would never retreat in today's situation. But Soren hadn't been a god for so long, and even the church had just been established. In this case, directly fighting with Lady of Night was tantamount to taking the old path of Sirik. God knew how many gods were waiting for Soren to reveal a flaw. As a new god, Soren had always avoided making enemies that were too powerful. In the presence of the Queen of Spiders and Lady of Night, he didn't want to fight with the enemy because he knew that sooner or later there would be a battle between Lady of Night and Lady of Silvermoon. First, he would fuse with the Death Priesthood. After he had officially advanced, he would have plenty of opportunities to make a move. The Lady of the Night and the Queen of Spiders had obviously joined forces, and this was probably because of Soren. As long as the Goddess of Magic was still alive, the Lady of the Night needed an ally, and the Queen of Spiders needed a powerful ally to deal with the Elven Pantheon. When Soren fully grasped the death divinity, he would be able to find an opportunity to take it back. Moreover, the Lady of the Night was also a person who acted on her own accord. Soren wasn't sure when the other party started to target Naruto. Maybe the attack on Mordor City some time ago was part of her plan. Such a dangerous opponent must have other trump cards. Sauron was now in a very bad situation. There were many gods who had their own ideas about how to quickly advance from a new god to a greater divine power. It could even be said that the current Soren was at his weakest, and it was also the time when they were most likely to kill Soren. Otherwise, when the Avatar crisis was over, there would be no gods who could threaten him. Even the god of light would not be able to defeat Soren when he returned to his divine kingdom. Soren's departure was too decisive. Some gods who were secretly peeping to gain benefits were caught off guard and were instantly targeted by the Queen of Spiders and Lady of the Night. What a cunning little guy. The incarnation of the Queen of Spiders was a huge and beautiful spider elf. She looked at Soren's disappearing figure, licked her lips and said, "Unfortunately, he is a very dangerous prey." She had been secretly watching Soren. The Queen of Spiders regretted not paying attention to Soren at the beginning, so that when she noticed that Soren was different, it was difficult to have a chance to kill him. The city of Mordor was almost impenetrable. Even if Lady of the Night planned to instigate an attack on the city of Mordor, they did not find any opportunity because the demons failed too quickly. The Queen of Spiders was a very vengeful god. She had always known that Soren had secretly taken in a group of drows who had betrayed her, and Soren would never have thought that there was an underground passage connected to the Underdark near the island of Mordor. If they had not resisted the attack of the demons at that time, the drows would have attacked here in an instant. Maybe it's just another Sirik. Lady of the Night's eyes had a trace of pride and malice. Her clergy had a certain conflict with Soren's, but even she did not have absolute confidence to deal with Soren. Even if she had some backup plans now that Soren had retreated, she could not stop him. The result is good. The Queen of Spiders glanced into the distance and nodded. The Lady of Silvermoon and the Goddess of Magic have consumed at least 50% of their divine power. Lady of the Night chuckled and disappeared, and the Queen of Spiders also quickly dissipated. It was time for them to go back and share the loot. At the same time, just as Soren teleported back to Mordor, the incarnation of the goddess of agriculture also arrived. You are very decisive. The figure of the goddess of agriculture appeared in the temple and smiled. It is not a wise decision to fight Lady of the Night at this time. She is one of the ancient gods, and even my father is not sure if he can defeat her. Soren nodded, then shook his head and said, Now is not the time. My father asked me to bring you a message. The goddess of agriculture was a little confused, but she still remembered the business and whispered, Naruto used the benefits of the sticks in exchange for the support of the demons. The demons have never done anything without benefits. I am afraid that the situation in the underworld is very bad now. After you have merged with the power of death, it is best to recover the underworld as soon as possible. Soren immediately nodded and said seriously, Within 3 days I will start to act. Another important reason why she did not want to fight with other gods was that Soren had to recover the underworld as soon as possible. As long as the underworld was stable, the multiverse would not be too chaotic. Well, the goddess of agriculture seemed to sense something and whispered, Then I will leave first. You seem to have a guest. A light dissipated. As soon as the figure of the goddess of agriculture left, the incarnation of the Lady of Misfortune appeared. She smiled and looked at Soren, then said, I have come to get the reward that belongs to me. What do you want? Soren's expression was calm. The Lady of Misfortune took a step forward and whispered, The domain of fate. This power is not suitable for you. As expected, Soren did not hesitate for long. He looked at the Lady of Misfortune in front of him, then reached out and touched his forehead. A golden light appeared. This light of divinity seemed to have infinite mysteries. He then passed it to the Lady of Misfortune in front of him. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Since the Lady of Misfortune had placed a bet on him, she naturally wanted the corresponding reward. Since I cannot be accompanied by luck, I will bring misfortune to my enemies. Looking at the light of divinity in front of her, the Lady of Misfortune suddenly showed a relaxed smile. She quickly took the golden divinity in front of her and then merged it into her forehead. In an instant, her expression was extremely satisfied. I should leave. Perhaps because she got what she wanted, the Lady of Misfortune was very happy. She went forward and kissed Soren's cheek, then said, We will meet again soon. The one who is not blessed by fate. May your enemies be shrouded in misfortune forever. Chapter 1088. Soren did not absorb the fate domain. Therefore, when he gave this domain to the Lady of Misfortune, Soren only lost 25 divinity points, and did not lose the more important divinity points. If a god wanted to give a merged domain and domain, then he would lose not only divinity but also divinity. The several subordinate gods cultivated by the god of light all shared the divinity from themselves. Therefore, under normal circumstances, very few gods would use this method to cultivate their subordinate gods. The Storm Lord cultivated the god of Lich in this way, trying to create a divine servant that could be oppressed. But later the betrayal of the god of Lich told the gods that this method would not work. For Soren, losing a little in exchange for more support from the Lady of Misfortune was worth it. Although she was not as loved as the goddess of luck, Soren was still an evil god after all. As long as there was a common interest, it was enough. I should go back. The figure of Princess Royal appeared outside the temple. Although Soren gained the most power in this battle, after all he killed 3 gods in one breath. Even if Sirik was a lesser divine, his divinity was close to a great divine. Clemvox and Naruto were once great divine powers, so even if Soren gained most of it, the others also gained a lot of benefits this time. Princess Royal's breath was obviously on the verge of a breakthrough. The Avatar Crisis was the easiest time for gods to improve because killing the target during this period was like the Abyss Blood War, they could gain most of the enemy's power. If it was during other times, they would need to slowly consume and absorb divine power. Part of the power of the 3 gods killed by Soren was swallowed by Princess Royal. At present she was close to the edge of a great divine power. The goddess of ice was originally a great divine power, and now a little opportunity was enough for Princess Royal to reach the great divine power. According to Soren's calculation, the divinity points should be enough. The only thing Princess Royal lacked was 1 divinity point. Arendelle needed someone to guard it. Soren walked up to Princess Royal and bowed his head slightly to express his gratitude. Then he said, If you need anything in the future, just let me know. Princess Royal looked at him calmly and said after a while, I feel that the energy storm that triggered the Avatar Crisis is weakening. I am afraid that the time for us to return to the kingdom of God is coming. If he had time, he could go to Arendelle to accompany Anna. Gloria will follow you to the kingdom of the gods, but Anna still needs to stay in the mortal world. If it's possible, give her a child so that she can have someone to rely on. Hearing the elder princess's words, Sauron's face suddenly showed a trace of guilt. Then he nodded. I will. Yes. Princess Royal gently lifted the long hair hanging down by her ear and glanced at him. She disappeared in front of his eyes along with the sparkling snowflakes. If the gods returned to the kingdom of God, even if they could come back, it would only be as an avatar. If Sauron wanted to give Anna a real son of God, then he must do it within this period of time. Brother. Lillian and Vivian did not appear until Princess Royal left. The two little girls had grown up a lot, and their minds could be regarded as adults. Sauron smiled and hugged them. Then he put his forehead against theirs and said with a smile, It seems that you are close to becoming a great divine power. That's good. But you haven't fully integrated with this power, so you'd better rest for a while. At the same time, I have a very important thing for you to do. Lillian and Vivian were eager to try and asked in a crisp voice, What's the matter? Sauron looked at them seriously and said, Move the kingdom of God. This may be very difficult for a new god, but you have to try to solve this problem by yourself. I need you to move the kingdom of God to a position close to the underworld. It's best to be close to the mainstream of the river Styx. Now that he had taken the position of god of death, everything should start to be arranged in the future. The situation in the abyss was still unclear. Vivian and Lillian had better move the kingdom of God to a place close to the underworld, so that they could help Sauron's kingdom watch. Leave it to us. The two little girls seemed very confident. The growth of gods was very fast. They had made great progress during this period of time. From the beginning, it was difficult for them to respond to prayers. Now they were in charge of their own churches. The twins of fear were growing at an amazing speed. Night fell. In the Tower of Motor City, Sauron held Gloria in his arms and looked up at the sky. He didn't know when it started, but the stars in the sky had become a little brighter. This was something that was difficult for mortals to observe, but the gods could feel that the Avatar crisis was gradually leaving. A new year had passed. Although Sauron had changed a lot of history, the duration of the Avatar crisis had not changed at all. This year the crisis would end completely. It would take nearly 3 years. The energy storm from the depths of the Sea of Chaos finally began to subside. Sauron held Gloria in his arms and stroked her smooth skin with his fingers, as if in deep thought. Suddenly he said, Are you afraid of death? Gloria raised her head in confusion, then kissed Sauron and said, As long as you are by my side, I am not afraid of death. And aren't you the Lord of Death? My love. To be with death is to be with you. Sauron held Gloria tightly in his arms and then said in a deep voice, Have you ever thought about taking over the priesthood of magic? Hearing Sauron's words, Gloria couldn't help but tremble. After a long time she whispered, If I can, I naturally hope to stand at the same height as you. Sauron continued in a low voice, Almost all the previous goddesses of magic could not escape death, especially when the Avatar crisis broke out. This is a very bad phenomenon, and it is even regarded by the gods as the fate of the goddess of magic. I have a way to try to get you the priesthood of magic, but mastering this priesthood also means that you have to bear the karma of the magic net. Gloria raised her head and kissed Sauron's lips, then whispered, That may be thousands of years later, isn't it? And this may not be fate's arrangement. Don't I still have you standing behind me? Sauron let out a sigh and murmured, I am very hesitant. The karma that the goddess of magic herself bears is too heavy. This kind of karma, as long as it backfires, is very terrible. Gloria did not speak. She just hugged Sauron tightly and whispered, Your choice is my choice. Chapter 1089. A new day had arrived. The city of Moder was still peaceful and prosperous. It seemed that it was not affected by the war of the gods. But the changes in the dark were very obvious. The undead had completely lost their power. Many dead mortals were no longer resurrected as undead, and only some corners of the material plane still had undead. The gods acted quickly. After the final king of the dead appeared, they quickly began to send believers of the church to recover the lost land and purify the land polluted by the undead. Sauron had a lot of things to do. The most important thing at the moment was to integrate the power of death. The murder from Sirik, the death from Naruto, and the death from Klemvox. Sauron chose the most essential path, which was to integrate all these priesthoods into one and become the true priesthood of death. In other words, he was ready to become the only god of death in the human pantheon. In the entire human pantheon, except for the Lady of Night who had a small part of the murder priesthood, all the other death priesthoods had been integrated by Soren. He was the god of death in the human pantheon. And he was also the most powerful god of death in all the races. The gods of death in other races were at most at the level of a lesser god. Since the ancient god of death, Jurgil, divided his power into 3 parts and gave it to 3 mortals, the god of death in the human pantheon had always been the most powerful. Now Soren had gathered this power. Although part of the priesthoods were in the hands of Vivian and Lillian, Jurgil did not only control death. During the Nesser period, Jurgil had the following priesthoods: death, the dead, the order of death, funeral and tomb, undead state, undead, waste, aging, exhaustion, tyranny, and dusk. At that time, Jurgil was honored as the Lord of all ends, the King of Bones, the God of Death, the Guardian of Death, the Guardian of the Graveyard, the Keeper of Death, the Indifferent, the King of Walking Corpses, and the Nagash. The plane he once controlled was the Grey Wilderness, the Triple Depression, the Skeleton Fortress of Anios. His former allies were Amanata, the ancient sun god, the previous incarnation of Roshanda, Shar, the Lady of the Night, and Taika, the former goddess of fate. The followers of Jesus were lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, and neutral evil. Jurgil's faction was lawful evil. From these ancient records, it could be seen that Jurgil was a very powerful god of death. This was because he was an ally of both good and evil gods. As long as his followers were not in the realm of chaos, they could follow him regardless of whether they were good or evil. This was the real Grim Reaper. Many ancient gods were beyond the scope of camps. The sun god also had believers from good to evil, but there was no chaotic camp. Perhaps some people would think that the birth of the first demons represented the war between the Order gods and the first generation of demons. That was right. These gods were the ancient gods of Order who had fought against the first generation of demons. Their essence was different from the current gods, but their strength was undoubtedly more powerful. The gods were changing. The ancient sun god, Roshanda's previous incarnation, used to control law and time. He was respected as the guardian of law and the guardian of time. The era of the ancient gods had come to an end. Father Oak fell for redemption, Mother Earth went into seclusion, and Jurgil gave up his position of death due to boredom. There were not many ancient gods who were still active today. Roshanda also started a new life by reincarnating. There was no doubt that this was the era of the new gods. The new gods had a close relationship with the mortals. Unless it was the Avatar crisis, the rise and fall of the gods had a lot to do with the mortals. Death is one. Part of Jurgil's clergy was in the hands of Vivian and Lillian, but the clergy of death was all taken by Soren. He was the only Grim Reaper in the human pantheon. He was also the current King of the Dead, the ruler of the underworld, the ruler of the undead, and the Lord of the end of all things. Soren had a lot to do, but there were very few things he could do. This was because he needed to integrate the power of death and regain the rule of the underworld. Most importantly, he needed to maintain the eternal sleep domain. This was a huge burden. Soren could not leave the city of Moder for too long while maintaining the eternal sleep domain. That was to say, before he completely mastered the clergy of death, he could only rely on his avatar to do things. In this case, he could not set up too many enemies, because now was also the time when Soren was at his weakest. Any enemy that was too powerful would bring huge losses to Soren. The underworld. In the deepest part of the sea of the underworld, a woman with a beautiful and graceful figure appeared. Her clothes could only slightly cover up her slightly shiny black jade-like skin. Her whole person was full of indescribable charm. This beautiful woman, who was 7 feet tall, walked through the fog with a charming roundabout dance. She easily avoided the well-known traps near the river Styx, and soon she came to an ancient palace. This was a palace that had been through a long time. It was only the size of an ordinary temple, and there were almost no gorgeous decorations. There were only countless simple words on the solid walls, which recorded many things from the beginning of the multiverse to the present. This was the Temple of Jurgil. It was almost extinct in the material plane. Its only function was to record death and the end. It was also the only duty that Jurgil fulfilled at present. Death Recorder? Some ancient and powerful undead guardians were here. Many of them acted as scrolls to record history. These powerful and ancient existences hardly participated in any battles. Their mission was to record death, and their final duty was to record the destruction of the multiverse. because Jurgil firmly believed that the multiverse would usher in the end of death from the beginning. Although this process would be extremely long, this was his mission. Jurgil's mission was to record the final destruction of the multiverse. This may take hundreds of millions of years, billions of years, or even tens of billions of years. If there was no accident, then the natural destruction of the multiverse would take an extremely long time. Our agreement is complete. The Lady of Night looked at the temple in front of her with interest, then said to the ancient god of death in front of the desk, "The new king of the dead has been born. I have also taken my share of the reward." I have to say, that's a really cautious little guy. You have a good eye this time. It seems that he can sit in this position for much longer than the previous ones. Jurgil looked up with an expressionless face and said, "I know." Jurgil did not care about the process of things. He only cared about the results. The results now looked good. Naruto was dead, Sirik had fallen, and although it was a pity for Clemvox, the new king of the dead had been born. This ancient god of death was only loyal to the position of king of the dead. Therefore, if the incumbent could not perform his duty properly, he would secretly overthrow him. Jurgil barely maintained a cooperative relationship with the previous death god, Mirko. Jurgil had a relatively harmonious relationship with the previous death god, Kalemver. Sirik, on the other hand, was treated with disdain. But even so, when Clemvox could not perform his duty properly, he still gave up his support to Clemvox. This was a ruthless ancient god of death. The Lady of Night was very curious about the temple, but she also knew that even if he gave up his position of god of death, Jurgil was still a terrible enemy. She wisely completed the agreement and left. Even if there were many secrets that she was very curious about, the Lady of Night wisely chose not to explore. As the Lady of Night left, Jurgil turned his attention back to the parchment in his hand. As the oldest god of death, he had lost all his hobbies and feelings for everything in the world. He was also tired of the authority of the gods. 1 year and 1,000 years to him made no difference. Everything was just a written record to him. He only had one mission: to maintain the order of death until the end of the multiverse. P.S. Readers who have monthly tickets can vote. Mwah. Chapter 1090. The Underworld. This plane used to be called the Hazy Realm. When mortals died, their souls would be pulled into the Hazy Realm. Most of the vast space in this plane was flat, dark, boring, and monotonous. There were no obvious topographical features. The Hazy Realm had the following features. 1. Stable. 2. Suppression magic. All magic is suppressed. Casting difficulty increases, casting effect decreases. The underworld existed in a special space in the multiverse. When mortals died, their souls would naturally go from the main material plane to the underworld through the river Styx, but it was difficult for them to go by their own will. Servants of God could come here from the realm, divine kingdom, of the god and bring the soul of the god they served back to the divine kingdom. Due to the agreement between the devils and Clemvox, the 9 hells had portals that led to the underworld, and the demon lords would sometimes create portals from the bottomless abyss to come here. In these 2 cases, demons could use these portals to bring souls back to the plane they lived in. The astral plane could not go directly to the underworld, and had to go through the river Styx to reach it. Most of the inhabitants of the underworld were souls of the dead, waiting to be sent to the plane of the god they believed in. These souls were petitioners who lacked the characteristics of the realm. They had no immunity, resistance, or special properties. The souls of the faithless formed a living wall outside the judgment city, the wall of the faithless, and the false believers were punished to work in the city. They were sometimes tortured by the demons. This was a rather ordinary plane, and the only feature was the crystal tower. Clemvox and Jurgil's crystal realm stood in the middle of the judgment city. It was a gloomy, dull, and crowded with the condemned. The crystal tower was a shining tower made of transparent stone. When Sirik was still the god of death, this tower was called the skeletal castle, but Clemvox changed it into a symbol of his promise to publicly and equally judge the dead. The underworld itself was not big, but it was the source of the river Styx, and also the transit point for countless souls. Whether good or evil gods, they had to transfer the souls of their believers to the divine kingdom from here. This was an ancient agreement between the god of death and other gods. To some extent, the god of death had to maintain a neutral attitude, because even the devils had a corresponding agreement with the god of death. Such was the view of good and evil in the multiverse. There were many mortals who should head to the Bator Inferno and the bottomless abyss after death. But, whether it was the gods or the Grim Reaper, there was an existence that they could not tolerate, and that was the Soul Stealer. They were a bunch of lunatics who challenged order. These people had almost no principles to speak of. Be it good souls or evil souls, they were all wealth to them. They stole these souls and sold them to other planes, completely ignoring the good and evil of the multiverse. Due to the existence of the soul stealers, even the kind-hearted Saint Samurai could fall into the abyss of hell after death. If the order collapsed, the rules would cease to exist. In exchange for the devil's help, Naruto sold these souls. It could be imagined that for a long time in the future, the gods would need the servants of God from another world to retrieve the souls that had been taken away by the demons. This was because they would always have believers that needed to be redeemed and not forgotten somewhere in the lower planes. This was the duty of the gods. When Soren's incarnation reached the underworld, it was already a ruin full of holes. The only thing that was still intact was the crystal tower, because even Asmodeus would not easily challenge Jurgle. Countless souls had been taken away by the demons, and Naruto used these souls as bargaining chips in exchange for the support of the demons. When Naruto died, most of the servants of death that served him had already fallen. These were all one with the gods. The entire underworld seemed empty, with only a few ownerless souls floating around. This time, the death pantheon was almost completely rebuilt. The underworld had undergone a huge reshuffle, and the demons were the biggest winners. The city of judgment was almost empty, but there were still countless souls floating in the river Styx. The Grim Reaper's duty was to maintain order. As the king of the dead, Soren did not need to judge all the souls. Only some of the more important souls were worth handing over. So, after coming to this plane, the first thing that he needed to do was to create the servants of death. This was another form of angel. Mortals called them angels of death, but Soren was more used to calling them servants of death. They were the assistants of the king of the dead, responsible for judgment, transportation, and delivery of souls. Some of the powerful dead that were reluctant to leave the mortal world were also brought back by these servants of death. Some in the kingdom of God. A light gate opened in the center of the underworld. As Soren obtained the title of King of the Dead, the petitioners could also reach this plane. In the golden light, some shadow angels flew up from around the great temple. They came through the light gate and knelt down on one knee in front of Soren's incarnation. There were a total of 12 shadow angels. 9 of them were men and 3 were women. Soren drew a little divine light from his forehead, and then gave this divinity to the power of death, and then injected it into the bodies of these shadow angels. A total of 36 divinity points. With Soren's divinity, the shadow angels in front of him changed rapidly. They changed their shape and turned into the appearance of the servants of death. Their weapon also became a death scythe that harvested souls. These angels were promoted to otherworld servants, and they would help Soren restore the operation of the underworld. I am the king of the dead, the lord of the end of all things. Soren's majestic voice echoed in the underworld. He pointed his finger to the wisest of the otherworld servants and said in a deep voice, I give thee the domain of truth. Thou shalt judge the sins of mortals on my behalf. Words were law. The invisible divine power formed the power of the law. An eye made of white light was integrated into the body of the servant in front of him, and then the first angel of judgment was born. I give thee the domain of slaughter. Thou shalt harvest the souls of traitors on my behalf. A little blood light appeared. Soren drew a little more divinity from his forehead and injected it into the strongest of the otherworld servants. It was a female angel, and she quickly turned into the form of a slaughter angel. I give thee the domain of tracking. Thou shalt guide Styx's soul on my behalf. A little bit of divinity fell. Soren selected the most agile of them and gave them the domain of tracking, and they were responsible for guiding Styx's soul. 3 rays of light rose. After Soren selected the most outstanding of them, the 3 chosen otherworld servants were promoted to otherworld oracles. They would be the leaders of the servants of death, and they would help Soren re-establish the order of the underworld. P.S. Begging for a monthly vote. Chapter 1091. The entire underworld was in ruins. After the demons' raid, the entire place was in ruins. Soren had to start everything from scratch. Fortunately, even though he had just taken over the role of a god, the memories of his past life had given him some understanding of death. Even without Jurgle's guidance, Soren could quickly build the system of the underworld. As for what the previous system was, it didn't matter. Soren already had his own ideas to complete the structure of the underworld. After Soren's arrival, the initial framework was quickly completed. The three foreign gods summoned the heroic spirits from the kingdom of shadows and turned them into the servants of death. They were the guardians of the order of the underworld and had a trace of the power of death. Their strength was roughly equivalent to that of a legendary demon. They were responsible for maintaining the daily operations of the river Styx and the City of Judgment. Soren's advantage was that he already had the foundation of the Kingdom of Shadows. The foundation that he had accumulated in the past finally came in handy today. He quickly completed the three most important parts of the underworld: receiving the souls, eliminating the rebellion, and judging the sins. The Killing Angel was the most powerful of the three. She turned groups of heroic spirits into the servants of death. Then, Soren gave them a trace of divine power and they began to eliminate the wandering souls, demons that might still exist in the underworld. These servants of death were transformed from the brave and powerful heroic spirits. They had the power to harvest lives. They were even strengthened in the underworld and were able to fight against high-level legendary enemies. In the darkness, many eyes were watching everything that happened in the underworld. Many gods were waiting to see how Soren would restore the underworld. However, Soren did better than they expected. Even Jurgil himself was surprised. In the past, all the gods of death needed his help to manage the underworld. However, Soren didn't seem to need this at all. He alone completed the reconstruction of the underworld. Groups of heroic spirits passed through the portal. The servants of death had a special power. This power was given by the river Styx. They were not afraid of the water of the underworld and had the special ability to take lives. This transformation was continuously carried out. It only needed a little divine power from Soren's incarnation to guide it. Soon there were thousands of years of servants of the god of death. However, they obeyed orders like an army. A portion of them began to clean up the City of Judgment, and at the same time they patrolled like an army. The other group advanced along the main stream of the Nether River. After wiping out some wandering devils along the way, they encountered a small group of powerful soul stealers. These soul stealers had tried to provoke the death god's servants, but the price they had to pay was death. The power of the underworld was extremely strong. After Soren had converted nearly 5,000 servants of the god of death, he finally felt that the divine power he had accumulated in the underworld was almost depleted. The death divine system's foundation was simply too astonishing. Soren could not help but look at the high walls of the Judgment City when he saw that there were still some heroic spirits that had yet to be converted. Wall of the Faithless. He thought about it and gave up this bold idea. This wall was built by the gods. Although it was not used as often as in the past, extracting its power would destroy it. This was something that many gods opposed. Deep in the Netherworld Sea, Jurgil had been observing all this for a long time before he muttered to himself, "It seems that this one doesn't need my help." After saying that, he picked up the ancient scroll again. The army of the servants of the god of death advanced quickly. They fought all the way from the mainstream of the Nether River to the Sea of the Underworld, and then followed the mainstream to clean up the enemies in the tributaries, killing the soul stealers who could not escape in time. After that, the Angel of Judgment led a group of servants of the god of death and began to lead the souls to the Judgment City. Soren had the power of lie and deceit. At the same time, he was the king of the dead. All the sins committed by people had nowhere to hide in front of him. The Angel of Judgment was endowed with the power of truth. His existence was like a judge deciding where most of the souls would go. There was a unique space inside the Judgment City. There was a huge portal where many souls would wait. Some would go to the kingdom of God and some would go to the abyss of hell. Most of the souls of the believers would enter the Nether River after a simple trial. They would flow along the Nether River to the depths of the Source Sea, where the souls were born and where they belonged. There was no reincarnation in this world. The duties of the death divine system did not include arranging the reincarnation of souls. They were only responsible for sending the souls to where they should go. There was a past life in this world, but there was not necessarily an afterlife. When the souls reached the Source Sea, they would be merged and then a new soul would gradually be born. If the mortals wanted to live longer after death, they would either go to the kingdom of God or be reincarnated in other planes. But these were not easy. More mortals' fates were to flow along the Nether River to the depths of the Source Sea after death. It was like the birth of the first soul in the multiverse. The water of the Nether River would wash away all memories. In just one day, the underworld was restored to order under Soren's management. The servants of the god of death began to lead the souls, and the believers who should belong to the kingdom of God were also waiting for the servants of God to lead them. The entire Judgment City was shrouded in a solemn atmosphere. Although the number of souls piled up was not many, some order had been restored. The underworld was not a kingdom of God. It was a special plane, and the kingdom of the death divine system was based on the underworld. Soren did not have the idea of transforming the kingdom of God because the underworld itself was an extension of his kingdom of God. His believers could go back and forth from the underworld. For all the gods, the god of death was a very heavy job. Some gods of death would even slack off, or even do things according to their own wishes. But Soren would not do that. He just reshaped the underworld according to his own order, and then used a set of more efficient methods to manage it. At present he had only completed the basic framework, but in the future he would have enough time to complete all of it. The devils have plundered a lot of souls. Soren stood at the top of the crystal tower and looked down at the underworld. Everything here was on the right track, at least the Nether River had been restored. He looked at the countless souls under his feet and murmured, Asmodeus has got the resources he wants. Then the last wave of the Avatar crisis is coming. The gods acted quickly. When the underworld was restored to order, the servants of God began to lead the souls to the kingdom of God. These would be handed over by the 12 angels of death promoted by Soren, and he himself would not stay in the underworld for the time being. The Avatar crisis was not over yet. The underworld had been greatly damaged and there were still many things he needed to do. Chapter 1092. The devils were very smart. As soon as the battle with the Death Lord came to an end, they quickly retreated after raiding the underworld for the last time. The remaining devils were actually the ones who didn't get enough benefits before but still wanted to see if there was a chance. These people were all strangled by Sauron's servants of death, and almost all of them were killed. The underworld was a special area in the lower planes. The approximate level was the material plane, the shadow plane, the spirit world, the underworld, the grey wilderness, the Shuraba, the Bator Inferno, and the bottomless abyss. As for the bottom of the abyss, it was the Sea of Chaos. The main stream of the river Styx was quickly taken back by Soren's servants of death. However, the river Styx ran through the multiverse, and there were still many places that needed to be patrolled by the Death God system. And in the afternoon of the same day, Soren's territory welcomed a group of special visitors. These people were the devils of the lower planes. The Death God system had always been in a relatively neutral state. Soren's visitors were a group of Ugros from the Scorching Inferno. This was a race of devils. They were specifically divided into Kanoros, Mizeros, Maleros, Nikaros, Honoros, High-Grade Eros, and Commander Nikaros. The leader of this group of visitors was Commander Nikaros. A Yugoloth of this level was basically equivalent to a demon overlord, and they often controlled a large area of territory. The devils sent a messenger and brought rich gifts, including various rare metals, high-grade soul crystals, materials from the astral plane, and destructive materials from the edge of the plane. The Great Death Lord. Commander Nikaros respectfully knelt down in front of Soren to express his respect. Then he said, I am Commander Nikaros Kanoros. I represent the other Ugros to visit the Great Death Lord. At the same time, we hope to continue to serve you. According to the oldest contract, it could be traced back to when the underworld was just growing. The Ugros were the helpers of the Death God system. Their range of activity was limited to the lower planes. These demons had another title, Ferrymen of the Styx. They traveled back and forth between the bottomless abyss, the Bator Inferno, the Grey Wilderness, the Scorching Inferno, and so on. They relied on the river Styx for trade, and at the same time, they undertook the business of helping other creatures cross the river Styx for a fee. As the greediest and most selfish creatures in the outer planes, the Yugolos had an absolute ruling position in the Scorching Inferno. Ugros usually served as mercenaries for demons, devils, or powerful beings from other planes. Among them, the most special one was the Duin Mo, also known as the Ferryman of the Nether River. This was a special advanced profession. Often, a ferryman of the Nether River who had worked for a long time would eventually become a half-undead. To the inner circle of the Ugros, the Styx River ferryman was a very important plane. It allowed them to travel to the lower planes easily, and at the same time find ways to obtain more benefits. Soren had become the Lord of Death. Correspondingly, the new ferryman of the Styx River also needed to be recognized by him. On the throne above the palace, Soren looked down at the Ugros in front of him. Although they were a group of demons, they could be used as long as they had value. Although the Ugros were only ferrymen of the river Styx, they also assisted the Death God's servants to protect the interests of the river Styx. They were like mercenaries, and when necessary, they would listen to the arrangements of the death god. Of course, the premise was that there were benefits to be gained. Soren's contemplation made the Yugros feel a little uneasy. But then Soren's voice sounded and he slowly said, "Everything will still be carried out according to the ancient contract. However, the waters that you can move and need to be redivided, and some of the tributaries of the river Styx have been stolen by demons and devils. If you want to continue in your current position, then you have to prove your value." There were not enough death god servants. He could not manage the rivers outside the underworld, but since these Yugros wanted benefits, then they had to pay something. Let them deal with the demons and devils first. Hearing Soren's words, the Yugros commander hesitated, but then nodded and said, "Okay. The army of the Scorched Inferno will soon help you regain control of these rivers." Although the Scorched Inferno was not as good as the Bator Inferno, it was still a battle between the underworld and the underworld. However, it was a combat system of the lower planes after all, and the Yugolos were the most numerous and powerful among them. The ferrymen of the Nether River represented the freedom of travel and trade in the lower planes, and they were willing to pay some price for it. "Very good." Soren nodded, then looked at the Yugros behind him and said in a deep voice, "Are they the ferrymen of the river Styx that you have chosen?" The Yugros commander respectfully said, "Yes. The great lord of death." Dukinmo was a special kind of demon. To a certain extent, their demonic form had been changed. The water of the river Styx was dangerous even for gods. Directly touching it would hurt the soul, and only the death god servants could easily remove it. But even the death god servants could not touch too much of it. Perhaps only Soren could swim a few times in the river Styx. The demons could not resist the corrosion of the river Styx. This corrosion was targeted at life, but the most special kind of demons, the Dukinmo, could touch the river Styx. Although they could not touch it for too long, it was still much better than other creatures. All the ferrymen of the river Styx had a number. The Dukinmo would only be responsible for their own area and would not easily step into the territory of others. So if some realms could not be reached directly, the creatures of the underworld might have to deal with 2 ferrymen of the river Styx. Any Dukinmo was Soren's servant. They were directly responsible to Soren, but according to the contract, the death god rarely mobilized them because their task was on the river Styx. "Let them come up." Soren waved his hand, and then many Yugolos stood in front of the hall in panic. Soren looked down at these demons, and then a little divine light appeared and turned into countless light spots that fell on these demons. Their life forms quickly changed. The characteristics of the Yugolos gradually faded, and a new aura of death appeared on them. This gave them the ability to fear aura, and at the same time they could cast transformation spells at will, gain the ability to control corpses, and use precise teleportation spells. Rows of Yugolos knelt in front of Soren. From today onwards, they were the new ferrymen of the river Styx. The river that was directly connected to the river Styx did not need Yugolos, and this area was under the responsibility of the death god servants. The range of activity of the Yugolos included the Grey Waste, the Scorched Hell, the Azura Field, the Bator Inferno, and the Bottomless Abyss. Under normal circumstances, Yugolos rarely set foot in places outside of these areas. They had been the vassals of the death god servants since the river Styx became stronger. Chapter 1093. The underworld was back to normal. However, it would take some time for it to recover to its peak because it needed more than one god to rebuild the death pantheon. Soren also needed to cultivate some weak gods in the future. However, after walking around the underworld, he also had some ideas in his mind. After his avatar returned to Motor, Soren immediately began to act. He soon found Lululu. After such a long time, the little cat girl had grown up a lot. When Soren arrived, she was practicing her new ability. Because of the divinity, Lord Soren. When she saw Soren's figure, Lulu immediately stopped and said respectfully, "Are you looking for me?" "Yes." Soren nodded, then looked at Lulu up and down in front of him. Although she was young, she was trained by him. There was no doubt about her loyalty. She was much better than those unreliable goddesses. Thinking of this, Soren couldn't help but smile and said, "Are you willing to serve me?" It was as if he was worried that she didn't quite understand. Soren looked at Lulu's puzzled face and said, "Although you have the power of divinity, you don't have a real divinity. If you are willing to serve me, I can bestow upon you a priesthood." Divinity? Lulu had a confused expression on her face. She knew how to fight, how to catch fish, and how to have fun, but she didn't understand what Soren said at all. War creatures were very talented in fighting. However, Lulu was more ignorant. Gloria had tried to teach her some advanced knowledge, but she was very active and couldn't calm down to learn. Therefore, Lulu's knowledge was estimated to be able to recognize all the words. After all, she was just a mortal and didn't understand a lot of knowledge. It often took hundreds of years for a new god to grow, and Vivian and Lillian were geniuses among geniuses. I am willing to serve Lord Soren. Although she didn't understand what he meant, it didn't prevent Lulu from nodding in agreement. The little cat girl bowed like a knight, then looked up and blinked. Is this okay? Soren couldn't help but smile. Then he smiled, shook his head and whispered, it should be okay. You have the divine power from the goddess of cats and dance. This goddess was originally a member of the gods, and she was related to death for some reason. I'll try to give you a clergy first. If you can get it, I can try to give you a new clergy in the future. Priesthood could be bestowed. And as the Lord of Death, Soren didn't need to give Lulu's divinity, he could create some divinities. Because he was the master of death. In other words, Soren's death clergy itself contained countless clergy extensions. Follow me to the temple. Soren turned and left and Lulu followed him. The two came to the inner part of the temple, and Soren's figure appeared in golden light. He looked down at Lulu like a great ruler, and then pressed his hand on her forehead. In the name of the Lord of Death, Soren. Sauron's voice carried some kind of powerful power of law. When the name of the true god sounded, countless golden lights appeared, and then he said in a deep voice, I grant thee the position of Guide of the Underworld, and Guide of the Underworld. I give thee the domain of tracking. I give thee the power to dispel the undead. The invisible power of law formed a mysterious seal, and in an instant the remaining divinity from the goddess of cats and dance was activated, and then the divinity of divinity was integrated into it. The Underworld Guide. Under Soren's power, Lulu's divine presence quickly appeared. Then, when a new divinity was born, the presence of a weak divine power appeared, and Lulu quickly became a true god. Underworld Guide, weak divine power. Soren gave Lulu the domain of tracking, and at the same time gave her the power to dispel the undead. Her divinity was the Underworld Guide, and she was responsible for the location of the underworld, and at the same time, guiding souls to the Judgment City. A weak divinity was quickly born. After becoming a true god, Lulu's intelligence improved a lot, and she immediately understood her duty, and then knelt down in front of Soren. She was Soren's subordinate god. As a weak divinity, in addition to the divinity given by Soren, she also had the divinity of cat and dance. These divinities came from the cat goddess and the dance goddess. Because of the compatibility, she didn't get the divinities of hedonism, large-scale joyous celebrations and sensual pleasure. Although these divinities were weak and limited, it was enough for Lulu to become a god. A divine mark appeared. It then disappeared into Lulu's body. This was Soren's mark, and from today onwards she could freely enter and exit the underworld, and she could also build her divine kingdom in the underworld. After everything was done, Soren also learned about Lulu's divinity, domain and abilities. Cat Goddess, Lulu, Underworld Guide, Level. Weak Divine Power. Other names: Guide of the Underworld, Cat Maiden. Holy Emblem, Non-Living Domain, Underworld Alignment, Chaotic Neutral. Lulu is actually from the Chaotic faction. Soren was shocked. Divinity, Underworld Guide, Cat, Dance Believers. Non-Priest Alignment, Lawful Neutral, Lawful Evil, Chaotic Neutral Good Domain, Chaotic, Seduction, Tracking, Trickery. Favorite Weapon, Giant Cat Claw. Lulu was actually from the Chaotic faction? Soren's mouth twitched, but he wasn't surprised because this cat girl did have the potential to be from the Chaotic faction. However, to Soren's surprise, Lulu Miao actually had the domain of charm and crafty. This was really an unexpected surprise. It seemed that she would not be too weak in battle after being officially apatheicized. At least, she was much stronger than other weak divine powers. Cats had a natural increase in combat strength. Lulu actually inherited the trickery domain from the cat goddess and the dance goddess, which made Soren feel a lot more at ease. Why didn't the Lady of Night succeed in capturing the cat goddess and the dance goddess? It was simple. Trickery domain. This domain often had many special abilities, and many times it would have unexpected effects, and the trickery domain itself would give extra casting bonuses. Chapter 1094. Lulu's ascension to godhood wasn't necessarily a big deal. However, she was still a true god that Soren personally gave her, so a celebration was held in Mordor City that day, and everyone who was busy gathered together to celebrate. The little cat girl was still a little silly. She didn't know how to be a god. Fortunately, she was Vivian's maid. With the two little girls teaching her, she should be able to adapt quickly. For a god with weak divine power, the number of followers was not the most important thing. As long as she could complete the mission given to her by Soren, she would be able to obtain some faith from Soren's shrine. Now Soren's giant god temple was being expanded. This was a huge expenditure of wealth. It was estimated that the entire giant god temple would need about 30 million Kindler coins to complete. It would take about 1/5 of Motor City. The city hall would not be able to fork out this amount of money. Fortunately, Soren had a lot of money to begin with, and he also had wealth from other realms. Based on the preliminary calculation, the giant god temple would only be completed at the end of the Avatar crisis. Even with the help of wizards and priests, as well as the mobilization of a large number of golems, the initial completion of the giant god temple would still take about half a year. The layout of the entire Holy Temple district was reorganized. The completed temple area included Soren's giant temple, Vivian's and Lillian's great temples, Lulu's and Saruman's core temples, and the Maiden of Pain's subordinate temples. Furthermore, a portion of the space had to be set aside as backup. At present, the amount of work in Mordor City was huge. First, it was Soren's temple, Vivian's and Lillian's temples, and then the fifth phase of Mordor City's transformation project, as well as large-scale farmland reclamation. After gaining the friendship of the goddess of agriculture, Mordor City's expansion speed increased again. However, this time it was mainly an expansion in agriculture. The growth of the population could never be separated from food. In the future, Soren planned to build Mordor into a giant city with a population of more than 1 million, so part of the farmland must be reclaimed in advance. Even with the help of magic, the initial cultivation of the land would only yield some gains. If they wanted a real harvest, they would have to turn it into a mature land. Mordor City Grand Library. Dinawara was wearing a standard witch robe and a pointed hat. She walked out with a large book in her arms. She was a mature woman in her 30s, with a beautiful face and a voluptuous body. As an intermediate grade witch who had advanced at such a young age, Dinawara had spent most of her time and energy on the research of arcane magic. As a result, her physique was rather delicate. But it didn't matter because the witches had enough means to help her complete some physical work. There was a small clay golem waiting outside the door of the library. It quickly came over and took the book in her hand, and at the same time, it carried some materials on its back. Dinawara clapped her hands and said softly, "Raffle. All right. We can go back now." The clay golem said in a dull voice, "Yes, master." The assistant golems of the witches all possessed a certain level of intelligence, roughly equivalent to that of a 12-year-old human. This was the clay golem that Dinawara exchanged with her own contribution points. Compared with ordinary citizens, they had certain privileges and could exchange for many things that ordinary people could not touch at all. She cherished this clay golem very much, not only because it was worth an amazing 300 contribution points, but also because it was her very important assistant. Golems could complete tasks such as cleaning, carrying, fighting and so on. Some dangerous experiments could also be done by them. Dinawara. At this moment, another young witch ran over with a face full of joy when she saw her. It was a delicate half-elf witch. From her race, it could be judged that she was a new witch because most of the middle-grade and high-grade witches in Mordor City were human, and they came from near the northern tower. Dinawara looked at the other party and smiled. It was one of her friends, Dinawara, a half-elf from Autumnfall. "Thank you for your notes." The young half-elf witch handed a note to Dinawara and said gratefully, "I was just about to return this note to you. Thank you so much. Without your help, I would never have mastered the stone to mud spell so quickly." Dinawara smiled when she heard the words. She touched the other party's cheek and said, "That's because you worked hard enough. Have you already learned the stone to mud spell? In that case, you should be able to take the reclamation task of the city hall. The contribution points rewarded for this task are much higher than others." The city hall was reclaiming new farmland. Not only farmland but also the third phase of the greening construction task, which required a large number of witches and droll. The effect of the stone to mud spell was very simple. It turned rocks into soft mud. After all, Mordor City was an island, and the scope of the rock layer was still very large. The tasks issued by the city hall were carried out according to the area. As long as the witches mastered the stone to mud spell, they could take a range of areas as the task. They would turn the land into soft mud in batches, and finally the city hall would receive the reward after receiving it. Next was the droll's job. Because the soil was alkaline and acidic, these needed to be balanced by the droll. The final land would be the initial cultivated land, which needed to be cultivated carefully and slowly turned into fertile land. This method of reclaiming farmland was much faster than the mortals in the past. Just as Lady Gloria had said, the true essence of arcane magic wasn't just for fighting. It could change one's life and ultimately benefit everyone. Yes. The young half-elf witch nodded and said, I've already taken the task of 1 square kilometer. I think I can finish it next month if I'm fast. Witches were usually a bit of a homebody. The two friends had not seen each other for a while and had a lot to talk about, so they went back together. Suddenly, Dina seemed to have thought of something and said softly, That's right. I heard from other people that the city hall seems to be preparing for the 3 Links project. You can prepare in advance. There should be a lot of good tasks. 3 Links project? The half-elf witch thought for a moment and asked, Is it water supply, electricity supply, and heating? Yes. Dinawara nodded and said, This should be a big move. Not only the city of Mordor but also the port area and the other 12 towns. It looks like the workload is not small. The half-elf witch said, Is that so? Then it looks like we really need to prepare in advance. There were many witches in the city of Mordor now. The witches had to rely on themselves to obtain resources and knowledge, and the most important of them was to exchange contribution points. Taking the construction task of the city hall was one of the safest and most efficient ways. As for the combat task, the academy witches were probably not good enough. Not everyone could adapt to the bloody battlefield. About 3 or 4 out of 10 witches could become combat witches. Most of the other witches were from the academy. They could fight, but they were not good at it. Basically, there were more people in the academy's wizard organization, while the combat wizard organization had fewer people. The probability of them being eliminated was very high. This was a shameful waste for Soren because those who had the talent to become a wizard could be very useful even if they were not good at fighting. Chapter 1095. The city of Mordor was a huge hole. And Soren had laid down the foundation of everything, which was order and law. Because of its close relationship with the goddess of wealth, the trade in Mordor city now occupied the mainstream of the material plane. Almost all the caravans knew that they could return with a full load after going to Mordor city once. And because of the close alliance with the goddess of agriculture, there were now a large number of droll in Mordor city. Some of them came to assist in the construction work, while the others came to learn. Saruman already had a small droll organization under his command. At the same time, many droll who advocated the balance between humans and nature came to Mordor city to learn from it. According to the layout of the city, they considered how to reduce the damage to the natural environment caused by population reproduction. At least for now, although Mordor city was the most populated city in the material plane, the surrounding natural environment had not been damaged much, and it was not as dirty and messy as other cities. Soren flattened most of the virgin forest, but he also rebuilt a large area of forest parks. Countless trees and flowers were planted and arranged in an artificial way, which not only maintained the balance of the island of Mordor, but also made the environment more beautiful. Only the legendary droll could feel that there was a huge magic circle under these forest parks. They absorbed the power of nature to balance the earth, water, wind, and fire. When necessary, they could also provide energy for the magic lock. The material plane ushered in a short buffer time. But everyone knew that everything was not over, because the devils had obtained a large number of souls from the underworld. As long as they digested these souls, the final battle of the Avatar crisis would come. It took time for souls to transform. It was conceivable that the devils, whose strength had greatly increased, would inevitably attack the material plane. At the same time, in the center of Mordor city, Soren also received new information. Have the Lady of Silvermoon and the Lady of Night started? He put down the information in his hand and murmured, It's almost time. Now that the conflict between the two goddesses has intensified, and they have begun to confront each other head-on, the time should be coming soon. The Queen of Spiders has hunted down 2 gods of the Elven divine system. With her hatred for the Elven divine system, it is absolutely impossible for her to stop, so the war in the Spider Forest should be breaking out soon. There was another piece of information in this report. Recently, the sound of hymns could be faintly heard from the core area of Glory City. A large number of clergymen had gathered near the temple. There were rumors in the outside world that angels had been seen emerging from the glowing portal. Angel? Soren rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself, "Is the god of light ready?" The last wave of the Avatar crisis was a battle between Order Evil and Order Good. These were the two most powerful forces in the multiverse. The bottomless abyss had been weakened since the fall of the three giants. Most of the other god systems were not strong enough. Neither the unrestrained wilderness nor the paradise were a threat. The underworld and the Bator Inferno were the strongest forces in the lower planes. But now the underworld had suffered a great loss. The scorched hell was split into two halves, the undead in the Grey Moor was heavily injured, and the abyss was in chaos. Asmodeus' power had swelled to the point that he was the strongest in the lower planes. With his ambition he would definitely fight the god of light head-on. For now. Indeed, only the 7 hills of Mountain Paradise could resist the 9 floors of Bator Inferno. It's a pity that the natural god system has declined. The natural god system was supposed to be the strongest, but now the natural god system could not dominate everything at all. The god of light was the only one who could fight in the material plane. Even Soren could not do this. Although the army of Motor City was the best in the material plane, Soren did not think that these mortals could fight against the Blood War Legion. There was almost no chance of winning. There were countless legendary demons among the elites of the Blood War Legion. These mortals would only die if they went up. Unless the gods were willing to summon a large number of oracles from other worlds from their divine kingdoms, there was no chance at all. And among the gods who were willing to sacrifice their divine fate for this battle, only the gods who were in the lawful and good alignment were willing to do so. Wasn't it interesting? Sometimes, these loathsome moralists can be very great. Because when the real disaster came, only they would rush to the front without hesitation, and they would not care about any gains or losses. As a god in the Order Evil alignment, Soren really loved and hated these people. The Lady of Night will never deal with the demons. The Storm Lord is not reliable at all. The Elven god system and the Orc god system can at most protect themselves. The Dwarf god system is not very useful. The Lady of Silver Moon and the Goddess of Magic are probably busy fighting. The God of War may take action, but I'm afraid he won't go all out. This last wave of impact, I'm afraid the material plane can only rely on the God of Light to resist it. Fortunately, he had expected this. The strength of the God of Light has not suffered too much, and many of the Saint Samurai legions are still there. In the last wave of impact of the Avatar crisis, Soren could at most protect himself. If he resisted it, the whole Motor City would be lost. But this did not prevent Soren from doing something behind the scenes. For example, the layout of the Bottomless Abyss could start. The Bottomless Abyss, the third layer, the Forgotten Land. It had been some time since he took down Litel. After infecting some lesser demon lords, Sauron finally gained complete control of these planes. The characteristics of the planes had been transformed again. After Sauron destroyed a large number of undead, countless demons were born from the Abyss blood pool. Almost every day thousands of demons were hatched. These demons were collected by Sauron's army, and then the survival of the fittest bred batches of middle-grade and high-grade demons. Today's Galumba arena had been expanded several times. Especially after Soren seized the throne of the Lord of Death, a large number of demons sought refuge in Sauron's hands. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that there was some kind of close relationship between the Baelor Lord Sauron and the Lord of Death. If they did not hurry to seek refuge now, when would they wait? The entire Garuba arena had been transformed into a gigantic military camp. The demon armies of the two planes were gathered by Soren, and suddenly became a very terrible force. And now this force had chosen its next target. That was the King of Ghouls, Dorison. After digesting Litel's foundation, Sauron immediately prepared to attack this demon lord. Because after killing him, his demon army could directly attack the headquarters of the King of Gnolls, Yeenagu. It was time to claim the throne of the demon prince. Chapter 1096. Inside the huge magma pool. The burly body of the Baelor Lord was immersed in it, and around him was a group of Baelor guards who were in charge of protecting him, as well as the elite succubus maids who served Sauron. The promotion of demons was much easier than mortals. Whether it was demons or devils, because of the existence of special genes in their bodies, most demons and devils could be promoted quickly by their superiors. But those who could get this promotion were often some lucky ones. Only a certain Abyss Lord who had just risen would promote his subordinates on a large scale. A veteran Abyss Lord already had enough subordinates, so he could only rely on himself to promote. The Baylor Lord Sauron promoted a group of subordinates, and as a reward for taking down Littell, he gave his subordinates a large number of soul crystals. Master. A pair of succubus that looked almost identical walked into the palace. They had incomparably coquettish faces and were only wearing tight-fitting black leather clothes and pants, fully displaying the exaggerated and seductive figures unique to succubi. This was a pair of new succubus elites. They had forgotten the memories of their previous lives, but vaguely remembered that they were conjoined twins. So after falling into the bottomless abyss, these two souls were transformed into succubus. They might be a pair of spellcaster twins in their previous lives because these two succubus had the level of a warlock. This required enough talent and a little opportunity from the previous life. According to Sauron's guess, the two should be born in a warlock family. As for falling into the bottomless abyss, it wasn't strange. Many warlock families in the material plane were very chaotic, especially those who wanted to maintain the purity of their bloodline. There were many taboo things that happened. These two succubus were personally transformed by Rhaenys. As the number one succubus serving Sauron, Rhaenys was no longer in charge of a small tavern. She was given a large fief by Sauron. The area was roughly equivalent to a southern dukedom in the material plane. But because it was in the bottomless abyss, it naturally didn't have that many people. Rhaenys built her own fortress in the fief, but as a smart high-grade succubus, she knew that everything she had was given to her by Sauron. So unless it was something that she had to deal with, she would try her best to come to the Galumba arena to serve Sauron. In order to prevent other succubus bitches from taking advantage of her absence to replace her position, Rhaenys was very smart to select a pair of succubus twins and send them to Sauron's side to serve him. In this way she would have enough sources of information around Sauron, and she could also monitor whether there were other succubi trying to take advantage of the situation to replace her. Currently, Rhaenys wasn't in the Galumba arena. Sauron gave out nearly half of the plane's territory, so a group of promoted secondary demon lords were busy building their own territory and recruiting enough demon army. Because the great Baylor Lord Sauron obviously wouldn't stop here, there was a new war waiting for them. In the huge magma pool, Sauron walked out naked. This place was directly connected to the inside of the volcano. At the same time, it opened a passage to the fire elemental plane. It was very suitable for Balrogs to improve their strength here. As a demon lord who ruled nearly 2 levels, Sauron's strength improved very quickly. Now, his attribute template had become, name, Sauron, High Demon Lord. Race, Demon. Form, Baylor, Grade 7, Large Otherworld Creature. Crossplane, Evil. Level, Creature Level 32. Attributes, Strength 42, Agility 30, Constitution 38, Intelligence 27, Wisdom 30, Charm 32. Alignment, Lawful Evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. Health, 18121812. Demonic Power, 2750630000. Domain, Slaughter, Death, Rage, Evil, Control, Flame. Skills, Sneak 485, Deception 425, Negotiation 315, Literacy 370, Intimidation 470, Spell Identification 320, Use Magic Device 320, Listen 315, Detect 325, Search 290. Abilities, Aura of Fear, Body of Flames, Whip of Flames, Burning Explosion, Bind, Demonic Claws, +1 Natural Magic Weapon, Demonic Skin, +10 Damage Reduction, Demonic Resistance, +10 All types of resistance, Damage Reduction 15 Boss, Night Vision 120 feet, Immunity to Electric, Fire, Poison, Acid and Cold Resistance 10 points, Magic Resistance 30 points, Telepathy 300 feet, Truth, Constant. Skills, Destructive Strike, Advanced Dual Wielding, Master of Preemptive Strikes, Multi-Strike Weapon Mastery, Beheading Sword, Xenogenic Weapon Mastery. Whip, Super Ferocious Attack, Super Whirlwind / Super Cleave, Instant Cast Spell, Telekinesis. Spell-like abilities, Freely Cast, Blasphemy, Freely Cast, Soul Assimilation, Freely Cast, Telekinesis, Freely Cast, Mind Manipulation, 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 and freely cast implosion. As the top Baelor Lord, Sauron's strength had reached a bottleneck. In other words, he had now evolved into a mature Baelor. Basically, he had obtained most of the skills that he could master, and all kinds of spells had been upgraded to the maximum. In this case, Sauron did not have much room for improvement. A part of his strength was fed back to his demon incarnation, which gave him the ability to control the death domain. However, because the Baelor form had reached the upper limit, Sauron did not gain any new abilities. Instead, he gained a small increase in all aspects of his attributes. For example, his strength had exceeded the upper limit of the Baelor, and his constitution was comparable to a dragon. His perception and charm had also increased to about 30 points because he was a leader. For now, there was only one way for Sauron to continue improving his strength, and that was to advance into the Baelor's special class, such as the Executioner and Beheader. Sauron already had some ideas about this. As a super-large creature, Sauron was nearly 7 meters tall when he stood up. Fortunately, the decorative wings of the succubus allowed him to fly a little. If not, it would be difficult to put on clothes for him. After putting on his armor with the help of a group of succubus maids, Sauron turned around and walked toward the front of the huge palace. His army was gathering. In the Forgotten Land and Naratel, a steady stream of demon army was gathering near the teleportation gate because the great demon Lord Sauron was summoning them. Chapter 1097. The 421st Layer of the Abyss, the White Kingdom. This was the ideal kingdom that the ghouls yearned for. Countless ghouls from other planes tried to create their own White Kingdom, but only this place was the ghouls' true paradise. However, for other living creatures, this place was very dangerous and terrifying. Because there were countless starving nether transformation ghouls here, and they'd done everything they could to satisfy their stomachs. To them, endless food was the most wonderful thing. This was the territory of the Ghoul King Dorison. As the most powerful ghoul, he first served Orcus, then was forced to submit to the Gnoll King Yeenagu and paid tribute to him for a long time. Now the Ghoul King Dorison was free. This freedom was because Sauron had completely killed Orcus, and he had just betrayed the Gnoll King Yeenagu, and no demon lord was willing to help him. As if he had a premonition of Sauron's attack, the Ghoul King Dorison called back most of his servants, including the ghouls that were raging in the material plane. He needed these servants to protect his kingdom. The White Kingdom was white. This was not an idiom but a general reference to the land of the bottomless abyss. Here the ghouls were the absolute rulers. Any mortals, devils, demons were potential food for them. The abyssal blood pool here wasn't to nurture demons, but to provide an endless supply of meat for the ghouls. Outside the palace of the Ghoul King, Dorison was a pale wilderness. Countless bones were buried in it. These were the flesh and blood of the ghouls. Most of them were demon bones and a few were the remains of other creatures. Accompanied by a blood-red light, a door opened. Sauron's burly figure appeared on this piece of land, and behind him was an endless army of demons that were entering. In order to attack this layer completely dominated by ghouls, Sauron gathered a demon army of nearly 300,000. The huge demon army stretched for dozens of miles, and it would take half a day just to enter here. Master. A demon assassin appeared in front of Sauron and said in a deep voice, "The Ghoul King Dorison is hiding in his fortress." Sauron gazed into the distance. It was a pale white skeletal fortress, built from the bones of countless creatures, including the skeleton of a giant dragon. For thousands of years the king of ghouls, Dorison, was at the level of a ruler. His core servants were the nether ghouls, and the best of them would evolve into barbarians with violent strength. For thousands of years, countless living beings had been eaten by ghouls. Their remains were buried in the ground beneath their feet. Because there were so many skeletons, the entire country seemed to be white. Ghouls fed on any flesh and blood. There was nothing in the abyss that they did not eat. Even if it was an undead with flesh, they would still take a few bites out of endless hunger. There was a huge army of ghouls here. There were some low-grade ghouls without intelligence in the periphery. They were like wild dogs in the wilderness of the White Kingdom. When some of them advanced to become nether ghouls, they would be brought to the inner parts of the White Kingdom and enslaved by Dorison. They would then be kept in captivity. The main task of this demon lord was to eat and find food. Because he was driven out by endless hunger, in order to get enough food, the ghouls would often attack the Taurens of the Abyss. An adult Tauren of the Abyss was enough for the ghouls to eat for a long time, and to the ghouls the Tauren's meat was delicious. The endless demon army arrived through teleportation. Under Sauron's command, they advanced towards the White Kingdom. The low-grade ghouls in the periphery did not need Dorison's command. After sensing the smell of flesh and blood, they swarmed over. However, what was different from the past was that the demons they were facing were not newborn demons and were few in number. Now they were facing a huge army of demons. Crush them. The six-armed snake demon leader roared excitedly and led the army to charge towards the ghouls in front of him. Countless ghouls blocked their vision. The law of this plane had been distorted by Dorison, and the demons had become the main source of food. This subconscious made them gather crazily. The battle broke out. Tens of thousands of low-grade demons rushed towards the ghouls in front of them and quickly killed them or were killed by them. Countless corpses were left in the wilderness of the White Kingdom. Sauron's demon leader advanced step by step. Soon, hundreds of thousands of ghouls were destroyed, until they encountered some huge grayish-white ghouls. Nether ghouls. Dorison's main army was also the backbone of the ghouls. As they gradually approached the White Kingdom, everything in front of them turned gray-white. These were the ashes left behind after the death of the creatures. The land under Sauron's feet was called the Dead Wilderness. All the buildings here were made of bones. Walking on the road, clouds of ashes were kicked up. The white ashes covered the whole city in a white coat. The residents here were ghouls and other undead creatures that loved flesh. Within the range of the naked eye there were also ghouls, Boda ghouls and so on. They were all servants of Dorison. Sauron's demon army advanced at an unstoppable pace until a huge white bone wall appeared in front of them. This was the palace of the ghoul king Dorison, the White Kingdom. The whole kingdom was filled with a strong smell of death. A large number of nether ghouls gathered together. They were like wild beasts waiting for orders, ready to pounce on the demon army in front of them. Dorison's figure was high in the palace. But at this moment, there was a trace of fear and madness in his eyes. He saw countless demons. This demon army had a large number of six-armed Nagas, Balers, Glabrizu and Soul Judgment demons. Any one of these high-grade demons could kill a large number of ghouls. Take this place for the Great Master. The killing made the six-armed Nagas crazy. They roared excitedly and led the violent demon army to attack the wall in front of them. The towering white bone wall could not stop the demons' footsteps. Countless demons that could fly and climb quickly rushed into it. The benefits made these demons crazy because they knew that after conquering this kingdom, Sauron would infect some secondary demon lords, and these demon lords would be selected from those with outstanding military achievements. Dozens of legendary demons turned their eyes to the ghoul king Dorison. If they could kill the enemy leader, there would be a place for them among the new secondary demon lords. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.